This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1769, Micro Spotlight, The Amazing Spider-Man, issues 68 to 75, The Clay Tablet Saga.
Laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek, uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is...
I'm Chris Eberly.
I'm Ian Levinstein.
I'm Shane Kelly.
And I'm Adam Murdoch.
And welcome one and all, we back.
Indeed.
And we have a special guest this episode.
Yes.
And hi.
Hey.
I'm just going to jump in here and say hi.
Hi, Dad.
That man behind the curtain.
For once, somebody we haven't had on the show before joins us, Mr. Dan Gvozden. Dan, how are you?
Hi. I'm just saying hi again. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited to be here. Obviously, I keep jumping in and saying hello.
I mean, it's better than saying goodbye.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Or something worse. Go away.
For sure.
And what a person to have on for a Spider-Man episode as a man who's been podcasting about Spider-Man for many years now.
Yeah, I run the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. We are, like you guys, a long-running comics podcast. Not quite as long as you guys have been around. That's quite a record you guys have. But, we're discussing kind of everything Spider-Man on our channel. We do seasons as we work our way through all of Spider-Man's chronology, not just the comics, but movies, toys, everything about the character. I mean, there's Eggo waffles. I mean... You name it.
Very cool, very cool. And you also do the a lot of the Easter eggs stuff for the Spider-Man movies as they come out as well, right?
Yeah, I write for the Hollywood Reporter, and my kind of claim to fame is doing snarky Star Wars articles and Spider-Man Easter egg articles. So
nice.
I think I went to my biggest one. It's like I went and saw like a several months early preview of Into the Spider-Verse and wrote a piece with like 100 Easter eggs that I found in the movie on like one screening. And I think to this day I haven't read an article that like found one that I didn't catch. So I felt like a real champ after that one.
Yeah,
oh, that's awesome.
That is really cool. Yeah, I think
Dan, do you think that's the best Spider-Man film?
Yeah, I would say by a mile, but Spider-Man 2 is like probably my second favorite superhero film, but Into the Spider-Verse, I think it's the best superhero film just in general, but I'm sure people will have contentions with that, but I think it's also just a stunning work of like pop art. Like I've never seen something at the movie theaters that looked and moved and felt like that, and I think the script is just out of this world good, an all-time great adventure film. So it transcends superhero genre to me while also being like the purest distillation of comics on the screen.
Yeah.
Wow. See, I just asked if you thought it was the best Spider-Man film, but you transcended that. That was a thrilling critique, my friend.
Well, we have like a 2-hour version if you really want to hear it. But I love that movie, and I'm kind of on pause with it because I became a little too obsessed with it, and then I was like, I have to like preserve this thing, so I haven't watched it in like a number of months. It feels like it came out forever ago, but I think that's the timeline we're stuck in right now, where every week feels like a year. But,
oh my God, you ain't kidding.
Yeah. So there you go.
Was that the one that you were on /Filmcast for as well, or?
I was on for that one and the Far From Home review.
Got it. Cool. Very cool. And a question we tend to ask here on the show for anybody who's on for the first time is how you first got into comics. So how about you give us a little bit of your backstory?
Sure. I want to quote the Spider-Verse intro about the backstories, but I'm going to skip it and get straight to the details here. I actually got into comics through cards first. I was one of those kids that became obsessed with like the Fleer Ultra and like all of those series in the 90s that kind of showcased heroes and all the Marvel collections that gave you detail about the whole universe. And it was a really great way to kind of get into the world of Marvel and comics because you just got a summary about everybody on a card and suddenly you were well versed in the whole world. And I collected all those, and I think it was through like the TV shows that I really kind of got into the idea of superheroes, especially that Spider-Man show from the 90s. So I was honored because I had John Semper Jr., who was the showrunner of that show, on my show twice with Christopher Daniel Barnes, and they gave us interviews for like 2 hours each. So really it was really fun, and John and I had become like, personal friends outside of the show. And so that was weird. But anyway, so I was watching the show and collecting these cards, and my father is a pediatrician, and he took me on a hospital rounds one day, and across the street from the hospital in Glen Burnie, Maryland, is this little shop called the Twilight Zone, or the Twilight Zone Comics, rather. And he took me in there, and he said, we're going to be, I'm going to be checking in on all these kids. Do you want a comic to like, take the time or whatever? And so we went in, and, immediately flashy on the spinner rack is Amazing Spider-Man 375. And if you know that comic, it's Spider-Man and Venom on the cover, Mark Bagley, and they're like posing to fight each other with a shiny gold, kind of foil cover. And I mean, what kid could see that and not want to pick it up? And it's a weird issue for a first issue of any comic because it's really the end of Spider-Man and Venom's feud. Like really they would, at the end of the issue, they make a pact to never fight each other again, and they truly kind of haven't really in all that time. They, Venom shifted to become an anti-hero instead of just a villain. But I was so captured by Mark Bagley's artwork in that book, as like, I think even more by Venom than Spider-Man, honestly. The way his tendrils wrapped around his face and formed the costume, I couldn't get enough of it. I tore through that thing hundreds of times in the like weeks to follow. It just kind of like introduced me to the idea that there were these like, you guys know this, stories behind all these characters. And I fell in love with it and started collecting. And I mean, I don't think it was like an in earnest collection, but I used to sneak out of my house and tell my mother I was playing down at a stream nearby. And my friends and I basically would sneak through a police station and through a farm and under a water tower to get to like the highway where there was a comic shop, Empire Comics. We had a hole we tore in the fence that we would crawl through. It was very like Stranger Things, and we would go in there and just spend our allowance like going through and collecting pieces of Maximum Carnage and all of those various things. And I had my eyes set on comics on the wall. And so, I mean, it's been I've been collecting, for 25, 28 years. And about a little over 5 years ago, I finished my collection of Amazing Spider-Man, and that was a real kind of end of a saga, and that's when I was like, I have to do something more with this, and it kind of got my show going and fueled my kind of quest to really get involved in comics in a larger way. So yeah, I don't know if that was torturous enough, but that's my small origin story.
Well, that's a great origin story.
Wow.
I'm fascinated, first of all, by the fact that, how old are you?
I'm 33.
Okay, so you came of age in, and to each his own, an era that I think I don't look upon fondly when it comes to Spider-Man stories. So I'm interested to talk to you about that.
Sure.
And also, so you have Amazing Fantasy 15 and Amazing Spider-Man #1?
I don't have 15. I have kind of just made a deal with myself that like, if it happens, it happens. Great. But I can't be dropping 20 grand on that with my current finances.
Sure.
I can tell you the story behind Amazing Spider-Man #1 if you want, but
I'd love to hear it.
I'm convinced myself I'm not going to get a 15. Although part of my head says like someday these Patreon funds they'll add up. And, I'll drop a cool, by then it will be $1 million for an average copy, the way that Spider-Man comics appreciate. But yeah, so I got Amazing Spider-Man #1. It actually wasn't the last piece of my puzzle. The last piece of my puzzle was Amazing Spider-Man #8. But #1 came. I was at a convention, and it was the first convention I had gone to with my wife. Well, she wasn't my wife at the time; she was my girlfriend. We had met in Maryland. She went to St. John's College in Annapolis, and I was working as a high school teacher. And I wanted to move out to LA to kind of get involved in the film industry. I professionally teach film, and I actually teach a class on making comics, which is really fun.
Nice.
But anyway, so we moved. We dated for like 3 months, and then decided we're moving across the country together, like crazy people. And so we moved to LA, and we went to a convention, and she was just kind of getting acclimated to my collecting, which is a tough thing for anyone to swallow, I think. And we walked up to this shop called VFV Comics, or no, FVF Comics rather. Fine, very fine. And this guy had this issue of Amazing Spider-Man #1, and there was no price on it, and it looked pretty good. And I was like, okay, I'm going to ask about it, just like out of posterity, because there was no part of me that was like, I'm going to get this thing.
Right.
And so he brought it over, and he goes, yeah, take a look at it. And there was this old man kind of hanging out by the store, and he came over and he's like, oh, this one's really special to me. I owned all of these comics, Amazing Fantasy 15, every, Silver Age Marvel #1, and I sold it to my friend here who runs this shop. And I sold it to him for like $1,000 for every book.
Oh my God.
And his whole shop apparently is run off of that one deal he bought that one day. So he always comes to the conventions to see how his books are selling and stuff. And so the prices were really reasonable because I think he was making a killing off however he sold it. And he said he wanted it for $2,500. And I was like, I don't really know if I can do that. And my wife was like, well, when else are you going to do this? Like, this is a nice looking comic. It's ungraded. You should really consider it. And so I went back to him. I said, what if I said $1,750? And he was like, what about 2,000? And I was like, and I was like, I don't know. And I was like, I'll think about it. And I left, and my wife was like, you got to do it. Like, there's no other time. You're not going to find a book of that quality. Because I'd given her this whole speech. And I was speaking it out loud too. It's just like, because once you get to those old issues, it's like it's either like destroyed or it's in excellent condition.
Sure.
And this was like right down the middle, and there was no grading on it. I thought this price sounds reasonable, so I went back and I did it. So then I went straight to CGC, and I was like, I need to get this graded because I didn't feel safe carrying it around. And I'm not big on grading books, but like this is a #1. I don't think I made sure I sat down. I read it there. I was like, I want to read it once. So I read it, and I was like, okay, I now can say I've read, this thing before I seal it away and make sure it's safe. So it came. So he told me, okay, this is like a 1.5 issue, and I was like, okay, and it looks pretty good for a 1.5. And he was like, well, that's what I graded it. So I sent it to CGC, and it came back as a 2.5.
Oh wow!
And I was like, all right. Like I did it, and it looks really nice. I'm really proud of it, and that was my #1 story. Not like anything totally unique, but anyway.
That's still
Congratulations,
fantastic.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's I love it.
And you got that at a steal, my friend.
Oh yeah, no. Now I look at it, and that's like easily like $7,000 to $10,000. So
Wow.
I feel pretty lucky, especially collecting it when I did. I think I just barely beat the boom on those Amazing Spider-Man comics. Everything is crazy now.
Yeah, seriously. And I mean, the fact that you got it from a collection that a guy literally sold it for $1,000, like that's insane.
That's insane.
Yeah, I felt bad for that guy, but he seems friendly enough with the guy that he comes and visits him at every convention, and I was like, man.
But you know what? My guess is that comic book vendor probably hates it every time that guy shows up.
It's entirely possible. That guy gave him millions of dollars of comics without blinking, so whatever. He can suck it up for a minute or two.
Yeah.
And Adam is definitely simpatico on the getting into comics via cards, because that's pretty much his story too.
Actually, Dan, I noticed several parallels between your origin and mine. I mean, the trading card, certainly a mutual confederate of ours who's also frequently on this podcast, a guy named Matt, had a complete collection of the Marvel Universe Series 1 and 2 cards that he kept waving under my nose to try to seduce me into the hobby. And he succeeded in this beyond his wildest dreams and my darkest nightmares, because here I still sit.
Yeah,
I've been
no
collecting
kidding.
for just about exactly the same amount of time you have. And I also know what it is to be dazzled by that gold hollow foil on the cover of Amazing number 375.
It's a great cover and a great issue. I mean, and it's not great if you're trying to learn who Spider-Man is. I guess there was that Fleer Spider-Man series that like was all Mark Bagley art, and all the cards would line up for big like full page panels and stuff. And that was really the thing that kind of, between that and the TV show, taught me all the ins and outs of Spider-Man, so I wasn't opening that 375 and going, "What? His parents are alive?" And it was, it's not a great place to get started, but whatever. They ended up being androids,
Yeah, that's right.
My X-Men origin is similar to your Spider-Man origin, because mine was Uncanny X-Men number 300 and Flare Ultra X-Men 95.
Wow.
Well, there you go. There you go. Yeah, that Flare Ultra series was great. I mean, all those things were great.
Yep, absolutely.
Now I was curious because I know exactly what issue was my first Spider-Man issue I bought, but I couldn't remember what year it necessarily was. So I was looking through the Marvel app, and I've gotten rid of my Spider-Mans a long time ago. I mean, I have a few choice ones that I kept, and I can't remember exactly which ones I did keep. But I did find out that my first one was 1986. It was issue 283. And I bought it off a 7-Eleven spinner rack across from my aunt's house.
Wow.
That's the one with like the Crusher or whatever on it,
Yep.
and Titania.
Yep. Just before Gang War started. And it's the issue after, which I didn't know this at the time. It's after 282, which was the anniversary issue with all the Marvel characters around the border, and a Spider-Man center frame, like a picture frame, in the center of the cover. And I had
like
Spider-Man.
The 25th anniversary one.
Yep. From that point on until the end of that run and the first like 40 or 50 issues of the next run, where J. Scott Campbell did the covers at first, and it got into Ezekiel and all that. So I had a pretty good run for a while, but yeah, I've since gotten rid of those. It was a lot of fun to read. I
found the exact comic because I remember buying it at a drugstore down the block from my dad's dog grooming shop in Queens. Amazing Spider-Man number 392. Talk about a horrible time to start reading Spider-Man comics. But I was driven by the Peter Parker No More on the front cover. And that was a cover date of August 1st, 1994.
Hey, but issue 400 is great, even if it's got like one of the historically worst covers ever.
That is true.
Yeah.
The cover that no one can actually see because of how horribly it was printed. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny that you found your original comic. I have a Slack associated with my show, and people share their collecting stories. And we had a guy share a story about how when he was a kid, he wanted to get issue 300 so bad. And he and his father went into the store, but neither of them could afford it. And he came out into the parking lot, and his father pulled it out of his jacket and had rolled it up.
Oh, no.
Stolen it from the store.
Oh, my God.
That was his copy of 300 for a very long time. And when his father passed away, he like went to try to go find it, and it was lost. And he figured that it must have gotten sold by his mother or whatever. You know how these things happen. And it wasn't until like a couple months ago, and this is why he was writing about it, he went to a convention and was like he's trying to rebuy his collection, and he was looking at an issue of 300, and it was exactly his copy from his childhood.
Wow.
Like on the other side of the country, it found its way around, and it had the exact folds from when his father rolled it up, and he took it as like a sign of like his father returning to him or whatever.
Wow.
But like really freak coincidence kind of stuff. I love those kind of stories.
That is crazy. Oh my God, this was the best deviation ever.
Real.
right.
Tangled webs we weave.
Indeed, most definitely. And speaking of webs, I will weave this web over to Chris, and you can go ahead and take the driver's seat from this point forward, my friend.
Honored, brother. Before I do that, quickly, I just want to again thank listeners who've been donating to the show because we continue to receive generous donations every once in a while from listeners. It's immensely appreciated. We're always kind of doing an ongoing sort of casual fundraiser for the show. So again, feel free to go on the site and donate any amount you'd like at the Comic Geek Speak site. So that's again greatly appreciated.
Most definitely.
So,
yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Ian, thanks for the segue. This is a topic I've been looking forward to discussing for quite some time. When I did my Silver Age Spotlight on Spider-Man, which we did back in 2012, we're getting older, Shane.
Oh, yes.
We touched upon these stories, of course, but I've always had a hankering to dive into them with a lot more time and attention. And so, like the term micro spotlight, we did a micro spotlight a couple months back on a classic Justice League arc. Now we're going to turn to Marvel here and focus on what for me is one of the greatest arcs in the character's history, certainly from his flagship title. So we're looking at Amazing Spider-Man 68 through issue 75. Although, as Dan mentioned, there's some people have felt that this story could kind of be noted at different stopping and starting points. We can certainly talk about that as well. We can also mention, of course, the sequel Lifeline, which came out more recently. But we've all read this, and I'm really looking forward to spending some time with the story, because when I think about sort of the essence of what makes Spider-Man great, especially from his Silver Age period, I think it's all to be found essentially in this arc.
Definitely.
So I thought we'd start, as always, with just sort of our initial impressions of this arc, and then we'll get into more of the nitty-gritty and go through each issue. And why don't we start with our distinguished guest, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think this is one of the hallmark Spider-Man stories. Interesting that you noted the Spider-Man Lifeline story from the 2000s, and
yep.
It's funny that you're talking about this now, because we literally in the middle of another Lifeline story in the current pages of Amazing Spider-Man. Right before it got halted, we were in the middle of this thing coming back into the universe for the third
I didn't know
time.
that. Okay.
Yeah,
Huh.
Yeah. So fortuitous timing. Yeah, I think this story is really exceptional. Like you said, it's got many different parts. There's kind of like 3 different phases to it. There's like Kingpin college stuff, a bunch of like random thugs of the month, and then this kind of more concentrated story with Silvermane. I think each part of it is really special, and it's like really the first kind of like long form story in in these books. I would almost say even in Marvel, like I don't think there's really quite a story like that spanned this many issues in early Marvel continuity. I think there's like the Kree-Skrull War, which came out like a year and a half later. And so to me, this is kind of like Marvel flexing its muscles in the best way possible. It's them showing that they could sustained readership that could keep up with this kind of thing, but at the same time showing restraint. It's not like today's mega events. It's a kind of quiet event, if you will, of continuing events surrounding this tablet. But they also have great things in the issues, like it addresses a lot of really interesting social issues like race relations. It really focuses on what makes Spider-Man great, which is like the street level element of the book. There's no focus on the Green Goblin or Dr. Ock or Electro. That's not to mention that the covers by John Romita on this run are stunners,
Yes,
the lot
are.
of them. So, yeah, I mean, to me, this is like Spider-Man taking a real step forward and trying to address really interesting topics, and really challenging like what these stories can be in this media. And to me, that's what's really exciting about this story. And it's just really fun to read and well written, like most Stan Lee, John Romita fare is. So, yeah, it's a stunner, and I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about it.
Shane?
This is the oldest Marvel comics I think I've ever read.
Really?
I think so. I mean, unless I'm forgetting something that we read for the show in some other capacity, that issue of Amazing Spider-Man that I mentioned, that was really my first Marvel comic that I got. And I got it because I like Spider-Man from the cartoons. And from there, I moved into X-Men and some other things as time went on. I always have been more of a DC guy, but Spider-Man is my favorite Marvel character. So to read these is my first experience in reading a Stan Lee, John Romita story, reading old classic Spider-Man. It was a lot of fun, and I was really excited to do it.
I'm so jealous of you. I so wish I could revisit these again for the first time.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you, for me, as I was reading it, in my head, I heard the voice of the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends Spider-Man, as well as the background music for scene changes and interludes. I would hear that overused, reused music from that show through the whole reading. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, excellent. Ian?
It was also my first time.
Splendid.
Yeah, I as listeners to the show will know, my Silver Age knowledge is spotty at best. This is not the oldest comic that I've read from Marvel, because mostly because of the Back to the Bins episodes that I've been a part of. I've read a couple of others, and as also the Tales of Suspense that we read, and a couple other things for the show. But this is an excellent place for me to get my Silver Age feet wet, because this is easily some of my favorite Stan Lee that I've read. Stan can be a wordy bitch. We know this with his works, and sometimes he gets a little bit too ahead of himself, and sometimes he goes a little bit too far. And this was not the case with these issues whatsoever, except for a couple of moments that I'll point out here and there in jest, but they didn't take away from my experience at all. And the art is superb. I mean, both the Romita and the Buscema that we get in this is just perfect. The coloring is really good, except for a moment where, for some reason, all of a sudden Robbie Robertson and Son are sort of colored like coal color.
I noticed that.
In issue, I think 71 it was, if I remember correctly. But overall, this was an incredibly positive experience, and I very much am glad that I got to experience it. And this is probably going to get me to read some more Silver Age Spider-Man.
Oh, terrific. Brother
I've got the perfect show for you.
Go on.
Go ahead, Bird.
Okay, well, first-time reader number 3 over here. This is the first time I'm reading the semi-legendary Clay Tablet Saga. I think I've got a somewhat better grounding in Silver Age Marvel than Shane or Ian do, but even so, it's pretty spotty on my end as well. I feel like I do more reading about all those classic early Marvel stories than I do actually reading them. So it was nice to actually dip into the primary text here for a change. And I did so courtesy of Chris having loaned me his Essential Spider-Man Volume 4, which means that I've experienced this tale for the first time in black and white. And also the trade begins with number 69. So I had to last time we were all at the CGS studio, Chris happened to have another collection of this story with him, like some kind of omnibus hardcover. So I was able to speed read number 68 really quickly, but that was a month and a half ago, so I'm a little hazy on the details, for which I beg forgiveness. I've been familiar with this story. I've known that it has a reputation as kind of a minor classic in the Spider-Man canon, and I have read the aforementioned Spider-Man Lifeline 3-issue miniseries, which was published in 2001 by Fabian Nicieza and Steve the Dude Rude, which I hope we'll talk about a little bit later on. So it was mainly through having read that miniseries, which I bought when it was new in 2001, that I'm even aware that this story existed. So now I've gone back and read the source material, and I do think I'm going to be allowing the Spider Maestros among us, Chris and Dan, to mainly hold forth about why this story has the reputation that it has, because to me, I liked it well enough, but it just kind of read to me like a slightly better than average and markedly longer than average late Silver Age Lee Romita Sr. Spider-Man arc. And it's nice that it went on for at length as it did, and it's in a period when Marvel, for reasons of distribution as much as anything else, didn't get that much into long-running subplots, but it's something that they were experimenting with. Even then, I think Dan's description of this thing as reducible to 3 acts is helpful here. The Kingpin arc at the beginning, a couple of little one-issue Andra-act slugfests between Spidey and Quicksilver and Spidey and the Shocker, respectively, and then the, as Dan said, more focused 3-issue, when we really get to the climax of the whole Clay Tablet thing, when Silvermane and the Magia try to get their hands on this tablet. So yeah, it's a bit of a delving into the New York underworld that Stan liked to play with so much in the Silver Age and Bronze Age. So we get a little more characterization of Kingpin. We introduce Silvermane, who would become kind of a classic Marvel mobster. And so Stan Lee gets to tell in that final arc what reminds me of the kind of sci-fi parables that Stan used to tell in places like the first 14 issues of Amazing Fantasy before Spider-Man came on the scene. This the sort of cautionary tale about what happens to this aging mobster, the personification of old age when he drinks this magic elixir and gets more than he bargained for. So yeah, good story, good classic seminal Spidey. Not really sure why it's as big a classic as it is, but I'm sure you guys will do all you can do to drive that point home to me and the listeners as the episode rolls on.
All right. Murd, as always, that was thrilling. One thing I would say just for me, in my initial comments, is that the first Silver Age Spider-Man story I ever read was Amazing Spider-Man 72, Rocked by the Shocker, which was in my beloved Origin of Marvel Comics, the Fireside book we've mentioned the show many times, where it was one of the first trades that sort of reprinted older Marvel comics, and Stan would write these charming essays giving, and I emphasize his version of how these characters were created, and what went into all that. And the Origin and Son of Origins each had the Origin issue. Then they had a secondary issue to show how the characters sort of evolved since their first appearance. And in Origins, they had Amazing Fantasy 15, and they had Amazing Spider-Man 72. And I'm a young kid, and I just remember being really taken. As Dan mentioned, first of all, the cover just drew me in immediately, Rocked by the Shocker. And then Stan's narrative voice, the way he was speaking to the audience in the captions, which maybe felt like I was part of something special. And the way the characters were interacting, Spider-Man's sense of humor, the artwork by, and we should emphasize, because the credits of these stories are a little confusing, and what Murr was referring to with my hardcover is the Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3 Omnibus I have, and there's a essay in the front from John Romita Sr., which he wrote in 2006 for a Masterworks edition, and he explains really what was going on and how he was in demand to do so many things for Marvel at the time. These books are coming out in 1969. That they would bring in other artists, in this case Buscema, and also the great Jim Mooney, who would draw over Romita's rough pencils, or just in some cases just Romita would tell them the plot, then they would pencil and ink and so forth. But the artwork in this issue 72 really just took my breath away, even as a kid, and I knew right away that I was reading something that was, for me, a step above some of the other superhero comics that I had been exposed to up to that point. And frankly, I even contrasted how much I enjoyed this story more than some of the older Marvel Silver Age from the early 60s that I was reading in that reprint book and so forth. We mentioned Stan Lee's scripting. I think this period, he's at the height of his powers as a writer. Like when I compare this period to, let's say, the early stuff he was writing, I think it shows how far he'd come, how much he had really gotten comfortable with the characters and characterization, and kind of letting the characters and the personalities he developed tell these stories. And it shows here. And also how comfortable he was with subplot, with characterization, with humor. And when I think back to when he and Kirby were doing that great FF period, like 1966, with the Inhumans, the Black Panther, it's a lot of overlapping and of stories there as well. I think this latter 60s period is his strongest as a writer. So I'm really excited to be discussing. And Murray, I'm sure Dan and I can do our best to explain why this is such an important period. Plus, last comment I'll make, probably, and I think back, and I'm so grateful this is my first experience when it comes to the essence of what makes J. Jonah Jameson tick when he's in the hospital. In these stories, definitive. So,
and it is so hard for me to hear anyone's voice other than J.K. Simmons' voice in my head whenever I see anything.
And that's just fine because, I mean, I hope J.K. Simmons read books like this because this is all you need to know to understand how to do J. Jonah Jameson.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
Can I speak to the classicness of the story and why, like, I actually understand why people would have trouble like seeing why this would be such a classic story.
Please do.
I mean, I think this is true of Spider-Man in general. I mean, there are a few stories that stand out from the, we're talking, if we're just talking Amazing Spider-Man, we're talking over 800 issues, right? But there are a few stories that stand out from there. You're talking like the night Gwen Stacy died. You're talking I guess like Maximum Carnage. Let's just say Craven's Last Hunt. That's a better example.
I would definitely say Craven's Last Hunt.
These are stories that are very plot focused, and with also strong character as well, and that's why they stand out. But the majority of Spider-Man comics are not plot focused. It's a very character centric book. We just did an episode of my show about the Marv Wolfman run on Spider-Man and why it has gotten forgotten over the years, despite it being really good. And it's our conclusion is that he wrote the characters really excellently, but there were no standout stories that like really like made a big splash in the kind of like world of comics or Spider-Man's mythos overall. And I read this really great quote from him in this book written by Tom DeFalco called Comics Creators on Spider-Man, where he said when he was approaching the series, he was given both Fantastic Four and Amazing Spider-Man to write at the same time. And he said, okay, Fantastic Four was the plot-centric book. Like I could do crazy and wild things in that book, whereas Spider-Man, I had to find the voice of the character, and it was all about the character and not about the plot. And he quickly realized I couldn't live up to Stan and Jack on FF, but I found my voice in Spider-Man. And I think that's true of this story, too. It stands out a little bit, I think, because the plot is easily identifiable. It's about a tablet that makes you young, and everybody's chasing it. And it's kind of one of the few stories that has a high concept to it from the kind of early Spider-Man runs. And that's why I think people like really look at it with special fondness, not to mention its length. But I think in reading it, it might not stand out because that plot is so reducible. It's really simple. But for me, what's special about this is how much the voices of the characters come out. It is Stan's writing. It is John Romita and Sal Buscema's pencils. But I could see someone not seeing why that is really that different from anything else from this era. So I understand your reluctance to kind of proclaim this as a classic.
The other thing I wanted to point out is that even though I do enjoy this, the one thing that I hope that Stan, although I know he never really learned, I'd love for him to stop attempting to do slang.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because hearing Spider-Man call Kingpin Dad at one point. I don't think. Edible, yeah, exactly. I don't know if anyone has ever done that, and I know I'm not from the '60s. And also hearing him, do the whole attempting to do black slang at times as well. It doesn't exactly age great, but
yeah. What I would say here, I'm glad you brought that up, Ian, because I think one of the reasons. Well, two things. First of all, I think Dan's right on the money in that the voices of the characters are so distinct in this arc, and it just shows you what a handle Stan and the artist working with him had on the characters and their world. But we also have to never forget that Stan Lee was the ultimate promoter, and his goal was to sell as many comics as he could to as wide an audience as he possibly could. And the real, I mean, part of that is just business, but part of it is also admirable in that he was trying to make many people feel like they were included in the Marvel world as possible in terms of the readers. So, Ian, like you said, when like there's the scenes where and Dan mentioned this earlier, where Randy Robertson, who's introduced in this arc, and is talking to his father Robbie, and they're talking about being black and dealing with that, the establishment and so forth. I mean, Stan Lee is a middle-aged white guy in his 40s, right, at this point, writing this. And you can look at it very cynically in a way, but I think you also have to remember the context of when these books came out. And there really wasn't anything like this in superhero comics up to this point. Even like, the classic Crisis on Campus. You can see how Stan's hedging his bets in that what they're protesting about is so vanilla, so milquetoast. Like, this is 1969, right? We've got, 1969 to 70, you have hundreds of bombings in the United States from various radical groups and individuals over things like the Vietnam War. You've had massive protests on the National Mall over the conflict in Vietnam. You've had racial rioting every summer from 1965 forward. But they're going to protest over, that they're not giving a low rent dorm, right, to the needier students. So it's a very safe thing because you can see he's not going to go into something really divisive because then he might alienate some of his potential readers. But he also wants to capture sort of the zeitgeist of the time, and he's trying to do that. So in some ways you can see it's kind of ham-handed and dopey. On the other hand, you can also appreciate – because this is before what Danny O'Neill and Neil Adams did in Green Lantern. Like, no one's talking about heroin yet. In fact, just a few years after this, Spidey himself, they do the whole drug issue with the Green Goblin and Harry and all of that. So, this is an ongoing process we're seeing with him here as a writer. But it's interesting, that tension between Stan Lee, who clearly was a thoughtful man who was sensitive to what was going on in this country, and then Stan Lee, who is, working for a company and wants people to buy these comics.
I mean, I think also, keeping it in context, Black Panther existed at this time in Marvel, but This is before even Falcon existed. He wouldn't come into existence until later in 1969. And to me, Robbie was significant at the time because he wasn't a comedic sidekick or a goofy racist stereotype. He was serious, and he made serious points.
And he's like Jonah's conscience, basically, really.
Yeah, and I love his bits about suggesting keep our eyes focused on the real enemy. It makes him politically shrewd, and it also there's also this great bit where the Kingpin, who is the face of organized crime, he's using social upheaval as a shield for him to steal from everyone. Which now the Kingpin is the mayor of New York City in the Marvel universe, which is a pretty on the nose political allegory, I would think. But even at the time, Kingpin was being used as a way to suggest, hey, the upper class of crime will use racial animus to drive us against each other so that they can steal from us while we're not looking. And to me, that's a really interesting, very subtle political point being made in the pages of a book that isn't subtle in every other way.
Now at this point, Kingpin has not been named, right? He's just Kingpin?
I think he's still Kingpin at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
We don't get Fisk, I think, until maybe after he leaves the Spider-Man comic.
Got it. Okay, because I wanted to point out the fact that Wilson Fisk has a right hand by the name of Wilson. So I would very much like to believe my headcanon is now that he just associates with only people by the name of Wilson.
That's probably where the name came from. They were like, what is his name? Oh, Wilson's in this book. So there it is. That's the name, Wilson.
Yeah. Exactly.
That did confuse me at first going through it. I'm like, wait a minute.
Oh, man.
What I really cherish about just looking at the first issue 68, first of all, the cover is iconic. How many times have we seen that image of Spider-Man swinging used on merch?
Yeah.
I mean, John Romita should be a millionaire by now if they were giving him proper royalty for the amount of times that image has been used.
They even put it in the PlayStation 4 game for a brief second. It shows up on the screen. They recreated it in that game. Yeah, it's on a newspaper that it's flashed in front of the camera at one point.
That's
Okay.
cool.
Dan, you definitely don't miss a trick. I'm impressed with this.
Yeah, I will have to look at that.
Now, what
I
I
don't know
really
what it's good for, but it is there.
it's invaluable on this program, my friend.
Great.
What I love in these early pages. Now, when we think about how the Kingpin is portrayed, Frank Miller, Daredevil forward, and how brutal he is, right? So, like when he's fighting his classic workout, like in the modern era, like he kills all these people, basically, or he breaks their bones, or And here he's like, you guys are fired. Get out. I didn't work up a sweat. But, they all walk away. No one's crippled.
He's working up to it.
Yeah, but right from the beginning, the essence is there. Like he's all muscle, right? He's not fat, so 6 men can't take him down. But again, those contrasts between what came before, what we're more accustomed to today, are just fascinating.
We don't really see Kingpin become murderous until like Amazing Spider-Man 197, and it's fittingly kind of the last time he was like a truly Spider-Man villain. He almost kills Spider-Man at the end. It's reminiscent of the scene from Into the Spider-Verse where Vanessa and her son walk in and stop him from killing Spider-Man. And at that point, he would like not kill Spider-Man and leave. And then he becomes like a Daredevil villain. So he like graduated into murder by leaving Spider-Man's comic.
The introduction we point out of Randy Robertson, Joe's son, and again, we take it for granted now in some cases, but it's very important that Stan is emphasizing African American characters, and they made a great point. They're not like the silly racial stereotypes and sidekicks that you would see in older comics. Mm-hmm. Randy becomes a supporting character throughout Spider-Man's history. And then the Josh characters, I would say, is more of like the stereotypical, caricature of a militant you might think of from that time.
Yeah.
What I like about the Robbie and Randy thing is that their argument between each other, I think it's not black versus white. It's like black versus establishment. And in a way that's like several steps removed from the kind of stories that you would typically get in books like this, where racism is, us versus them. And here it's about like a political hedge and, how one makes their way in the world, and how and about father and son. I mean, I think even just portraying black fatherhood at this time is fascinating for someone like Stan to want to put into the book.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Absolutely.
for me, it's one of the strongest part. I agree of the whole arc is those conversations between, and later on in the arc when Jameson charges in furious because he's given Spider-Man good coverage, and Robbie's like, look, you can do your editorials, but I'm going to report the news.
Yeah.
What a contrast to our media today. Anyway, but and Randy is just kind of in awe of his father standing up to this blowhard, this corporate overlord, essentially. It's again, I think this is some of really shows what a strong scripter Stan Lee had become by the late 60s.
I have 2 points in these first couple of pages that I wanted to bring up. One about Empire State University. As a lifelong New Yorker, I love fantasy New York, as in places that could never actually exist in New York, and ESU is one of them because just from the layout of the place, like there's no way you could fit dorms. And the fact that they're even having a fight about dorms of those size on an actual campus in the middle of Manhattan, like it's just not happening. It's sort of like the perfect hybrid between, I guess, NYU and Columbia, if you think about it in your head. But where are they getting the space? It doesn't make any sense geographically, but who cares? The comic.
It's great that you say that it's a combo between NYU and Columbia, because I always imagined it's like if Washington Square Park was handled like the plaza in Columbia.
Yes.
Like that's kind of in my headcanon, ESU is NYU, if only because I went to NYU and I want it to be that, but also because the Coffee Bean is like very clearly off of Astor Place.
Yeah.
and like where the Starbucks there is now, or at least where I think the Starbucks is now, because it's been a few years.
Yeah.
But like it's always been NYU to me in some way.
No, I get that definitely, especially geographically. That makes sense. The other thing I wanted to point out is now that you mentioned the fact that Romita Sr. was not doing full art duties, that he was doing layouts for a lot of these, you can especially notice it in the faces on page 7, because especially Gwen and Peter's faces, it's almost Kirby-esque. With the cheekbones and the eyes and the nose and the mouth, so you can see just how much the inker is influencing things here.
Well, yeah, you've got Jim Mooney, who was doing a lot of the work here. I should emphasize though that Gwen Stacy, I mean, Romita completely conceived her whole look.
Yeah.
As he did with Mary Jane Watson, because Steve Ditko, Mary Jane was there, but she was like behind a plant or something. You never saw her face. The Gwen Stacy's look, regardless of who's drawing it, it's Romita.
Yeah.
Like the current Gwen Stacy miniseries, which I'm thoroughly enjoying because it takes place essentially in between the panels in the Silver Age. Gwen is one of the great designs as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
She's just the headband or the glasses and just the way she always looks and someday they'll get her right in the movies, but it's I thought Emma Stone was good if they'd actually given her more to do, but
hey, the best Gwen we've gotten so far has been Spider-Gwen.
Yes. The other thing I wanted to point out, we're talking about the visual, is when you look at the older Spider-Man, like the earlier Silver Age, and of course Peter's like hipper now, like he's got like the 60s turtleneck, and because when Romita came in, Romita was a romance artist at DC Comics for years prior to coming back to Marvel, so he couldn't help. The joke is he couldn't help but draw these characters when they looked more attractive and fashionable, and so forth. That's another fun little aspect of these later Silver Age stories.
Yeah,
it's funny you say that, because one of the few times that I got to talk to Stan Lee, I asked him about, what the design for Mary Jane would look like if Ditko was around to reveal her. Because, Ditko designed Gwen first, and then Romita completely redesigned her to what you're describing.
Right.
And Stan joked to me, he said, because Mary Jane is introduced in that famous reveal with the door opening, and he said, well, if it was Ditko that had drawn her, Peter would have opened the door and slammed it in her face. Because his women were just not very attractively drawn. No. And, like Romita just completely flips that script. Yeah.
Outstanding.
How about an issue? Because again, with a lot of the classic character concepts are here that have been built upon, over and over since. So in issue 69, you mentioned my wife.
Yeah.
And now, in the 80s forward, that means a broken neck.
Yeah.
If not worse. Here, it's just a backhanded slap. They says, get him out here. He's finished. He's washed up here.
Well, that's what I was kind of having read a little bit of Daredevil and certainly watching the first 2 seasons of the next Netflix show, I was fully expecting that. So when he's just like, get out of here, I'm like, well, okay.
Yeah.
That was a little bit out of character from my perspective.
He also definitely has sumo wrestler physique as drawn here, which I appreciate because he's supposed as he says many times, because like I said, Stan likes to repeat himself. Little do they know is that I'm not just a fat blob, but I'm all muscle, and that's basically what we see when he rips off his shirt and starts fighting people is even though it looks like he's the Pillsbury Doughboy, he's not actually that.
It's funny you mentioned that, because like in this story, there's a great sequence towards the later half, and I'm not one for fat shaming, but like I do appreciate Spider-Man mocking his villains. And there's a great bit where Spider-Man begins to make fun of Kingpin over like how hefty he is, if you will. And I have to think that this is the story that Bendis modeled his second arc of Ultimate Spider-Man after, where Peter Parker literally pulls out a list of fat jokes to run over Kingpin with, and it's one of the highlights of that series, and probably like a comedic peak for Spider-Man, even if it's probably a little bit dated now in terms of like PC-ness. But I love anytime Spider-Man gets shoots the shit out of Kingpin and the way he looks, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, Spidey's like the way he insults his villains. That no other hero does that with that kind of panache. I mean, he's in a class by himself. And again, that's Stan's voice. By the way, Dan, you reminded me of something. You may be able to confirm this because you're more knowledgeable than I am. I thought I read a quote once from Bendis where he said that this era of Spider-Man he considers like one of the greatest periods of the whole character, and that he drew a lot of inspiration from. I thought I read that somewhere.
I don't know that particularly, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, the way that the stories were kind of, laid out in this run is, I think, similar to Bendis's kind of approach, especially this story being that it's 8 parts. A lot of his ultimate stuff would be, 6 parts to a story, whether it's writing for trade or whatever, where he would weave in through different villains. I mean, I think it really is. This story sets up a very active formula for Spider-Man that it would kind of replicate. I would say the entire Marv Wolfman run is an imitation of this style of writing. And I would even say that a lot of Nick Spencer's current run, all of it reads like him trying to do peak Silver Age Stan Lee.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, like you said, they're bringing villains in and out, but the constant thread that I think keeps the reader engaged is also Stan and the artists always go back to the subplots and what's going on with not only with Peter but with the supporting cast and how that's all interweaving with the action going on between Spider-Man and whoever his nemesis is of the moment. And that shows how Romita and Lee were firing on all thrusters when it came to their collaboration. And Romita writes about that in his introduction to the omnibus I have here. I think it's really masterful. I mean, because this could easily bog down, with this kind of narration. But it moves, right? Like they move from one to the next, but they're always reminding, okay, don't forget what's happening with Captain Stacy, or here's what Jonah's doing. But it all serves the story. But not only does it serve the story, it also emphasizes sort of the essence of each character. For example, when in issue 69, when the police are interrogating Randy and Josh, the other protest leaders, and Jameson comes in. I'll read what he says to Stacy. The Bugle wants to know if those young anarchists will be punished, Stacy. So again, Jonah flying off the handle, and then Stacy responds like as the critical thinker he is. That's a strong word for a group of youthful demonstrators, Jameson. They helped the Kingpin steal that tablet, and you know it. I'm afraid I haven't your insight or perception. That one panel, I know those two characters.
Yeah.
In that one panel, right away.
I think you've highlighted the appeal of Spider-Man comics is like it's the supporting cast, whereas we highlight like, hey, Batman has got the best villains gallery, right? And Spider-Man, I think, a close second to Batman in terms of villains, but Spider-Man has the best supporting cast of any costume character, at least in my opinion. Although I am very biased, about as biased as they come. But the genius to me is, and it's almost a shame that we label this by the MacGuffin, which is like the Lifeline or Clay Tablet, because to me that's such a secondary thought to all these stories. And I think that's the genius of it is like no MacGuffin is ever interesting enough to hang 8 issues of a comic series on.
Right. Like
it's the characters and their interpersonal stories and the changing villain every issue that keeps you hooked through. And then, oh yeah, I guess we are after this MacGuffin after all. But to me, that's the appeal of Spider-Man comics. It's like I said earlier, it's never about the plot, if you will. It's about the characters, and you highlighted that wonderfully.
Dan, I want to emphasize this is a phrase I use often on this show, and I mean it here sincerely. I'm glad you're here.
Well, it's a good time.
I also appreciate how each one of these issues, although they're part of an arc, clearly, very much do stand on their own.
Oh, sure. Yes.
And if you were to just randomly, at the time have just, gone up and picked up, I mean, obviously since, Chris, your first issue was, you said 72, you could easily read that and, not be lost. And it's very different from today's world of, the quote unquote writing for the trade, where this is an 8-issue arc that does not feel like the same sort of 6-issue arc that we would get today, where like if you were to go in the middle of part 3, you'd be lost and have to wait for the trade. Situation like that.
And Ian, let me support your point with words from Ramita himself. This is him writing the introduction. You would think after hearing that outline that Stan and I planned all this in advance, meaning the whole Clay Tablet thing, with each and every twist carefully plotted and orchestrated. I can assure you that was not the case at all. In our story sessions, we set out to plot one issue at a time, but we'd be happy just to make it through 1 hour without interruption. Our aim was to get a complete story in 1 month.
Wow.
So, and think of the next page over from the Jameson Stacy confrontation. You have essentially a page devoted to Randy and Robbie having a debate. Like, when you look at most comics coming in the late 60s, this was not happening. Where, these are supporting characters. It's not even like Spider-Man or Gwen or the villain. It's Jonah's city editor and his son talking about, it's a father-son discussion about, the establishment and militancy and what's the best way to approach this. It's well done, especially for the time. I mean, it makes Robbie. I mean, I've always loved the Robbie character. He's a reassuring character. He's smart. He's perceptive. He's measured. It's great.
Although I wish that the crowd on the final panel of page 5 had taken a little bit more time to plan their slogan. Because cook an egg, cook your goose, turn the demonstrators loose.
Ian, what I really appreciate is that because you've never read these before and you're a little bit younger, how much you're having fun with the really dated lingo.
Oh my god!
Jargon.
It's groovy, man. It's groovy.
It's funny that those chants aren't good because that was like Stan Lee's job when he was in the military was to write like jingles for things. So you'd think he'd be able to churn one out. Yeah.
Oh man.
Well, and when talking about things that may or may not be bogged down, I will say the first issue, maybe this one to me at first felt a little bogged down, but as I read through the other issues, it's more of my not being used for this kind of writing and being used to how things are written today.
Right.
And Shane, what would you say? What would you say is the contrast for you?
This is more expletive without being unnecessary. Whereas in today's world, you don't have thought bubbles. You might have inner monologue, but it's not nearly written the same way. Things like I can't sit down and read this in 10 minutes. I can sit down and pick up almost any current comic and read it in just 10 or 15 minutes.
Yep.
This took some investment to do.
We'll do podcasts where we're covering like a run on Spider-Man, and it's like, how am I going to read 30 of these in a week? I'm going to go insane.
Yeah.
It took, let's see, I sat down this afternoon at, I think, what was it, 1 o'clock, and by the time 4 o'clock had come around, I finally got to being done with the 8 issues. So that says
12 cents worth, Ian.
Yo, absolutely. Please, 13 might have even been enough.
I started this Sunday night with the first issue, and I read a couple issues Monday. I read 4 of them yesterday, and the rest of them today. It was not a chore. It was just enjoyable to immerse yourself in something so densely written that wasn't unnecessary.
Oh yeah.
And Shane, you reminded me of again how much I miss the thought balloon. And how important the thought balloon was to the narrative of Spider-Man.
Oh, absolutely.
Because so much what makes Spider-Man an interesting character, because thought balloons were used with Spider-Man for much of his history.
Sure.
It's only really recently that thought balloons are gone, but so much of what made Spider-Man and Peter Parker interesting was his inner monologue that he was having with himself.
Yeah.
About how he's going to fight this villain, or how he feels about Aunt May being sick, or this girl, or he can't pay the rent, and that's again
his constant bad luck.
Yeah, and that further humanized the character. Mert, I wanted to ask you, what do you think? What do you think about the contrast between the writing style of late '60s versus today? Do you have a preference, or?
It depends largely on what mood I'm in, Chris. Yeah, this was actually kind of refreshing, actually, just to dip back into well, latter-day Stan Lee, when he was, as you say, Chris, at the peak of his powers, before he started turning out things like, Ravage 2099.
I knew we were going to get to that eventually.
I thought he was going to say Scripperella.
Oh, God.
I have not had that pleasure.
I'm so glad you brought up the thought balloons, because I've actually been arguing that on my show, that the death of the thought balloon was the death of Spider-Man in comic form. I mean, I still enjoy the comics for the most part, but I do think there's something really lost for the Peter Parker character, because he's all internal. And so, like, as crazy of the ideas that Dan Slott came up with, and look, I love his Superior Spider-Man run, because it was kind of it was forced to be internal, because it's literally dealing with brains and things like that. But I felt like when that ended, he lost his grasp on the character, because he couldn't do these long pages of Spider-Man swinging around the city and us getting what he's thinking about. And, I think it's also the reduced page count in Marvel's comics these days don't allow for what we like to call the thinking, swinging scenes. Mm-hmm. But to me, that's the heart of the character, and the heart of the comics is the internal nature of it all. And you get little boxes now. Nick Spencer is doing this weird thing where Spider-Man is like an omniscient narrator of his own book, which is really bizarre. Like he narrates the villain scenes, which I don't really know how he knows about the villain scenes. But I think the lack. I know people argue thought bubbles were being overused and stuff. And if you read any like J.M. DeMatteis book from Spider-Man in the 90s, like he indulged in that really hard. He was all about psychology, which is where you get the awesome stuff like Craven's Last Hunt from. Mm-hmm. But I miss it a great deal, and I think it's why I find myself reading the 60s comics more than I do anything modern, because I feel like I can connect to it, even if it isn't of the vernacular that I am used to today.
And in the 60s comics, you get awesome things like Spider-Man taking off his shirt to make a web mannequin. And then bonking people over the head while still shirtless. That was an awesome set of scenes.
And Ian, I'm glad you brought that up, because it was those little touches that really differentiated Marvel from DC.
Yes,
because you never saw DC characters in the Silver Age, early Silver Age, doing things like that, where improvise like they like you'd say, oh, that's almost like real life. Like he had to take his shirt off, and then he has to put it back on. And the artist, actually, Romita and Mooney, take the time. Like he doesn't put his shirt back on in one panel. You watch him like struggling to get it back on while he's still fighting. Yeah, essentially. And we may take that for granted now, but that's the kind of artwork that really dazzled an audience. Yeah. In this time period.
Absolutely the case. Absolutely.
I think that's why one of the most iconic shots that is reused across all the Spider-Man movies is him running and stripping his clothes off, right? Like there's something very physical to that. He doesn't run into a phone booth and come back out, Like we get to watch him tear his tie off and throw it into the lockers or whatever.
Any other closing comments on 68 or 69? Those are two particular issues.
69, I have to point out the very last panel. Because this was the most like end of an animated series menacing laugh moment in the entire scenario. Because, from now on, it's Spidey against the world. If they call me a menace and treat me like a menace, I might as well be a menace. It's so cornball, but it works. It's so much fun.
Well, Ian, I'm glad that's a recurring theme. Dan will know this cover. There's a classic cover, it's very early Bronze Age, where they show like a frenzied mob in the foreground, and then Spidey's looking over the mob in the background saying, "Go on, world, hurt each other, kill each other. I don't care anymore." What do you know what issue number that was, Dan? 10.
I'm not particularly sure that I know the one you're talking about.
Oh, really?
Okay. I mean, I it sounds familiar, but I'm not. It's not coming to mind at the moment.
Yeah, but that type of theme, Ian, will reoccur in Spider-Man in various forms over and over again. So,
very good.
I mean, he's the only character that like you get like issue 50 where he quits being Spider-Man, but even just like a dozen issues earlier and then a dozen issues before that, he's quit being Spider-Man because of his anger, associated with, how the world treats him and so on. So, people like to say, oh, issue 50, that's the one that Spider-Man 2 is based off, the first time he quit being Spider-Man. And you're like, well, no, he actually quit in issue 18 too. And, it's just one of those things. Yeah.
It's kind of just what he does. He's the amazing quitting Spider-Man.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't have it any other way.
All right. Look at that cover for issue 70.
Beautiful.
God.
Absolutely beautiful.
We have to remember that Romita, eventually became Marvel's art director, but Stanley had him wearing so many artist hats. He'd do covers, he'd do merch art. He designed costumes. Like a lot of the famous Bronze Age costumes for Marvel are all designed by John Romita Sr.
Mm-hmm.
Wolverine, Punisher, etc. He designed a lot of villains. His sense of layout, these covers, it's just the drama of that. Imagine seeing that on the newsstand in 1969 as a kid.
I love all of his covers with like a spotlight effect on them. They would use this cover on that collection of that hardcover big collection of John Romita Sr.'s art, the issue 70 cover. But I even have like right in my hands right now, actually, my Marvel Treasury edition of Spectacular Spider-Man #1 with that great spotlight cover. He obviously loves the design. But yeah.
Okay, just as a quick aside, I have the issue. It's a Spider-Man 112.
I was just going to tell you that. I just looked it up.
Shaney poo.
You guys
world.
faster on the trigger.
Go on, Chris. I don't care.
I just don't care anymore. And then the subtitle, Spidey cops out.
Go ahead, Chris. You look it up yourself. I don't care.
Spider-Man drops the mic and walks away.
That's the one where like they like Jonah basically says that he's like a chicken because he's too distracted. He leaves someone to get like hurt in an apartment building, and so he swings away for various reasons. And they're like, "Oh, he's a chicken. He won't." And so he's like, "Fine, then maybe I am."
And then he tries to imitate a chicken, and he does it wrong. And someone says to him, "Have you ever even seen a chicken before?" Sorry.
I want to note now, but for a very different reason. I'm also glad that you're here.
Is that an Arrested Development joke?
But of course it is. It is. Cuckoo, 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 cuckoo.
That's a brilliant show. All right, so in issue 70, again, I like the great writing, the touches of continuity. So the Kingpin ends up in the local jail with the minion he had dismissed for speaking about his wife in the previous issue.
And speaking as we have been about contrast between storytelling of the Silver Age and the modern day, can you imagine the modern day Kingpin emerging from his ivory tower of crime and personally participating in a heist?
No.
The way the Kingpin did in this story?
Nope.
Good point.
Yeah. And or the Kingpin forgetting his master plan for about 3 seconds as he screams, I gotta get out of here, I gotta catch the Web-Slinger, when like literally a couple of pages beforehand in the last issue, he was all he's working with me, and literally the guard has to remind him of that, and he's like, oh yeah, sure,
oh wait,
that's what I meant.
He's my partner.
And you see Spider-Man's long-standing sort of love-hate relationship with the police, because throughout the 60s and into the 70s and even the 80s, there was always the police thought Spider-Man had done something he hadn't actually done. He was framed, or they misidentified a suspect, and they start hunting him again. And here a cop is trying to bring him down, but he's not trying to actually shoot him. He's trying to sort of drive him to earth so he can try to arrest him. Give yourself up, mister. I'd rather take you alive.
How about the panel on the top of page 3, and just how goddamn beautiful it is. Ugh. The just the shading on Spider-Man as he's on that rooftop. I mean, that's
the silhouette of the city in the background.
It's perfect. And this is also a good part for me to point out just how excellent the transfer is for Marvel Unlimited for these issues, because every single color pops just the way it's supposed to pop.
Oh, wonderful.
And I am beyond happy about that, because that's not always the case with these digital issues.
And I don't mind being able to blow it up when I want to look at the art a little bit better. I mean, it's not like looking at the original art, but it's still a lot of fun to kind of fill the screen with a certain image just to stare at it for a little bit.
Yep.
Now the panel, I'm a few pages ahead now, where Pete's trying to get to sleep.
Oh, I was just about to bring this up. Yeah.
Dan, go ahead, sir.
No, we call these the floating heads of guilt. This is one of the earliest appearances of these, and it's just everybody from his life showing up, hovering over his head, and it may be the first appearance of this. It's become a Spider-Man staple where
absolutely.
The New York night sky is suddenly illuminated with the faces of all the dead people in his life. But yeah, these are the floating heads of guilt.
It's the Spider-Man equivalent of Lisa needs braces, dental plan. Lisa needs braces, dental plan.
But what's great about the device, and I love your description of it, Dan, the floating heads of guilt, but is that it's reminding the reader of how overwhelmed Peter is. And again, you realize, like, how does this guy juggling all this? I mean, his secret identity, his aunt's perpetually dying, his skinflint boss. He can't reveal. His girlfriend thinks he's a coward. Captain Stacy's going to figure out my identity. And then of course, the barrage of question marks in the next panel, as he can't really get to sleep, and it's great stuff. And this is again, and Ian, let's go back to your love of the dialogue for the time.
Oh yeah.
When did you take zombie pills this AM?
That was a thing people said.
So great.
Spider-Man comics are like the uncut gems of 60s of 60s comics. It's just a like anxiety fever dream for issue after issue. I mean, they are so like I mentioned we did an episode on Marv Wolfman recently, and I tried to like catalog all the running subplots through his like 20 or so issues, and I had like 10 pages of details prepping for my episode. I was like, how am I going to even speak to all these? Like, and I felt like Peter Parker truly in that moment, because he always has a million things plaguing him at any given time.
Well, especially like on the very next page, in literally the one panel to the next, he goes from "she does love me, she does trust me" to "hey, you're crying. What brought that on?"
Yeah.
A coward. You think I'm a coward? Don't make me answer that, Peter.
Yeah, isn't there one somewhere along the way? She's like, I don't know why I stick around.
I don't know why you do either sometimes.
I think that's exactly what Peter says. He's like, why would anybody be interested in me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Poor man.
And then the back and forth between JJ and so good.
One of my favorite relationships in Spider-Man is the Jameson-Robertson relationship.
Yeah.
Because Jameson totally respects Robertson, because he lets Robertson speak to him like that, and he doesn't fire him. Because as you learn more about J. Jonah through the years, as characters developed, you see that in some ways he actually is a very righteous man, but he gets so blown off track with this obsession he has. And if you go back to, I think it's Amazing Spider-Man 10, where Jonah actually admits he hates Spider-Man because he makes him feel small, essentially. But their dynamic is really sensational.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and this is minor, but again, looking at things of the time, I can't remember the last time I really would have noticed characters smoking while going through a comic.
Oh, you can't escape in these books, Shane.
Yeah, yeah.
Jamie D would always talk lovingly about how Steve Rogers would always have a pipe. When he was like at leisure in a panel, for example. Oh yeah, Tony Stark smokes. It has cocktails.
Sure.
You know, it's
it's
the time.
Speaking of which, did anybody notice on page 9 Dean Stanley?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep, me too.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
I didn't even catch that. Oh, Ian, well done.
And as soon as I realized that, that's the voice I heard.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's his first cameo.
Yeah.
I love Robbie because he's such a mystery of a character too. Like throughout the entire Spider-Man run, we don't know whether or not he knows that Peter is Spider-Man. It's alluded to strongly. Yep. But like there's other things about him that are wonderful. Like this series illuminates that he's playing a bit of a game with Jameson. Like he knows what to tolerate and what not to tolerate, and plays the politics of that. But then there's scenes like, I think it's issue of Amazing Spider-Man 196 where Peter thinks Aunt May has died because Mysterio has faked her death so that the burglar can break back into the Forest Hills home to find buried pirate treasure. It's really stupid. It is especially stupid, but which leads to issue 200, but which is a fine issue. But anyway, so like after that moment, like Peter goes down to like the docks, in New York, and Robbie with his smoky pipe and all comes to join him down there and talks to him about death and admits that his first child was died at a very young age in childbirth or whatever, like around then. It's a very young death of a child, and it's like, wow, this is a superhero comic, and we're talking about like child death. As a relatable thing. These characters are so rich, and that's what I Robbie is one of the most rich, I think, of the creations, and Stan gets it running, and I think in these issues.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it speaks to the strength of the fundamental concept of the character, that other writers can sort of mine all those wonderful moments. And that then it goes back to the strength of what Lee and his collaborators created from the get-go.
Yep. So,
now the end of this issue has one of the classic Spider-Man motifs, which is Spidey loses temper because he can only put up with Jonah for so long, and he tries to sort of rattle him a bit, and I don't know if we call this a panic attack or an anxiety attack, but Jameson has like a fit and he collapses.
Yeah.
And of course, and this is like another end to an animated episode, Ian, where Peter now thinks that I've lost my temper and now I've proven Jameson right about who I actually am.
Yeah. I've proven myself as dangerous as he always said I was.
Yep. I will point out this scene is the first appearance of Vanessa Fisk.
Yep. Off just in shadow. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh man. What did they do? They called it shock in the next issue, but also Ned Leeds didn't feel a pulse. So that sounds like more than just a shock to me.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I assumed it was
Jameson would go on to have heart issues appear throughout the series. There's a point where he had like a heart attack, and so his wife forces him to resign as editor of the Bugle. And there's several issues where he's like working out in Central Park to try to like strengthen his heart so he can fight and win the Bugle back.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy. A couple other quick points I wanted to make on the issue. When Kingpin breaks out of the prison, and the combination of sound effects, to me, from this point forward, the Kingpin is only known as the King Poof. It's just too perfect. And also, the spotlight from the police, it kind of looks like it goes from page 11 to 12 from being day to night in a matter of an issue. I mean, in a matter of a page. So I'm not sure if that was just, a coloring error or what have you, but then it's basically back to day after that. So I don't know what's going on there.
Ian, it was dusk.
Oh, okay. Good enough.
May I remind you that around this time there was a cartoon airing where Spider-Man's web was reaching buildings that were never actually in sight. So
that is true. And he was pointing.
Cut a little slack.
And he was pointing. And he was pointing at other people who were dressed just like him. And then
he's on top of a skyscraper and still whips onto another something above him.
Yes. Now,
all right, so go ahead, Ian.
The next issue to me is
that cover.
It's a great cover, but this issue was the most ancillary to me. I felt as if including Quicksilver was a nice nod, and bringing the Marvel universe together, because that's something that Stan and everybody else likes to do. But it kind of makes this feel like a in the middle of an arc. Meanwhile, this is happening, and for that reason alone, this one felt the most forgettable to me.
Yeah, it's an action interlude and a way of giving some extra promotional time to a relatively new character to the Marvel Universe, who will be getting still more play shortly.
Yeah.
I think it's one of Stan's more elegant versions of advertising. I think about Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1, where like Thor flies by in a panel and it's like, oh, hey, it's Thor. Go check out his comic. And then like the next panel is like, oh, hey, it's Captain America. Go check out what he's doing or whatever. Like it literally goes panel by panel through all the books they're publishing. And it's like, okay, cool. Now back to Spider-Man stuff. And to me, this at least like found like a at least half-hearted reason for why we would needed to learn more about Quicksilver.
And it's another classic motif where another hero thinks Spidey's a criminal, so they try to take him down.
Yeah.
That's happened more than once.
Mm-hmm.
What I really enjoyed in this issue was, again, the subplots. So they bring in John Jameson, Jonah's son, who Spidey saved back in Dan's beloved issue one of Amazing Spider-Man. And then Robbie takes control of the Bugle, and he gives Peter finally a fair compensation for his photos. Parker, what are you mumbling about? Isn't that check big enough? So again, the contrast between Robbie's style versus Skinflint Jonah. So again, further developing that character. The Quicksilver battle, I just think is fun. I mean, the artwork is wonderful. The way they capture his motion. They really emphasize Quicksilver's powers, what he's capable of doing.
Yeah.
But more important for me, because I think Stanley wrote Jameson so well, and when they give Jonah the paper, in which Robbie has written an article that shows that Spider-Man actually tried to save the Clay Tablet, it wasn't working with the Kingpin. I'm surrounded by assassins. If this is Roberts' idea of a joke, I'll have his hide. Spider-Man's guilty. And then for emphasis, he's guilty, 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 guilty.
So he's guilty?
And then Ned leads us to think, I sure don't be around when old Blood and Guts learns what Robbie paid for those photos.
Yeah.
All this while his son, whom many people, including quite a few writers of Spider-Man comics over the years, have opined is the origin of Jonah's ire for Spider-Man. Just the fact that he showed up, young Jameson, in Amazing #1. He's on hand trying to calm the old man down while he's ranting and raving about how guilty Spider-Man is.
Yeah, this is pre-Man-Wolf days.
I always felt like this issue and the next one are so action-focused, if only to give Stan time to come up with the intricate plotting of the following 3 issues. And, the art is big. There's like some pages with only 3 panels on them, which is like a far cry from Ditko's tightly, rung 9-panel pages, I mean, Romita and Mooney in this case were always bigger than anything Ditko did. But I mean, this issue feels especially slim because it is all big splashy action, and I think it's what allows for those final 3 issues to be so intricately plotted.
Yeah.
Well, 72, we should also point out that John Buscema comes on board, one of the master artists of the era. I mean, he worked, into the 90s. But I mean, this is Buscema's artwork in issue 72. Like, it's clearly John Buscema. Like, the way, like, his Gwen Stacy, that's John Buscema. Clearly. Yeah. But I assume that, in fact, in Romita's introduction, he says that for some of these issues, he didn't draw it all. He talked to Stan, they did the plot, then he gave the plot to Buscema. Mm-hmm. And then Mooney was doing, inking and so forth. But 72, again, because I have it attached to it because it was the first Silver Age Spider-Man story I read. But as I've read it so many times over the years, this issue does a wonderful job of balancing the action with the ongoing drama of Spidey's supporting cast and subplots. And it doesn't miss a beat. You mean you have Aunt May going off to Florida. And I love Stan's caption as Aunt May appears. And now, for the benefit of Aunt May's countless fans, we happily present one of the few scenes which doesn't show her at death's door.
Yeah.
I like the little sarcasm there about a beloved supporting character. And then, of course, when Jameson's in the hospital, it's a full page devoted to him ranting. And by the way, these stories where I learn words like cogitating, which is the top of that page, earlier in the arc, the word obstinate, and one of my favorite words, twinkle toes, all came out of this arc. So, so much of my vocabulary to Stan Lee. But you got to give him props for writing up, in a sense, for trying to elevate the audience's vocabulary.
I'm trying to remember what word it was, but there was at least one word that I had to ask my Google what the word was, because I didn't actually know it. If I come across it while we're flipping through, I'll try and find it. But yeah, no, he's definitely one for the alliterative text and the words that not many other people would use.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
and that's not a bad thing.
Shane.
Not
That's
at all.
not a bad
Not at
thing.
all.
Yep.
Not in this day and age.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
God, no. But Jameson's meltdown, to this day, I still laugh out loud when I read this page. His enraged with the operator because they can't get him the right connection to the bugle, that he thinks he's talking about a pet shop or a bagel. The nurse desperately trying to inject him with a tranquilizer. It's really great dialogue. It's really funny.
It's beautiful, and again, J.K. Simmons. That's it.
Oh yeah. Plus, they're allowing him to smoke a cigar in the hospital room. It's
Yeah.
And the next page is classic Gwen and Peter soap opera angst,
which they themselves even point out.
Yeah.
At one point, a couple of pages later, with okay, soap opera time's over now.
Yep.
So here's what you've all been waiting for. Yep. Shocker!
And they reference that, of course, Flash went to Vietnam.
Yes.
So he's back on leave, and Gwen has that harsh dig where she says, for a boy who's always missing when there's any trouble, it's strange how hostile it can be to a man who's been in combat.
Oh yeah.
Ouch. Oof.
Yeah.
How many wars has Flash Thompson been in?
He went to Vietnam, and then he was re-enlisted in the Iraq War where he lost his legs.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if there was another one in between there.
I don't know how much you count his action as Venom as wars, if you will. So, he went to war in hell once. Does that count?
Sure.
I love that this book can move from tone to tone so effortlessly. You've got this big, bold comedy scene with Jameson. You've got this melodrama with Peter and Gwen. And then literally a page later, you've got a guy wearing his couch cushioned covering as a uniform, blasting holes in the ground,
I love the Shocker design. Oh.
It's very good. The Shocker, there's long been a rumor that the Shocker was originally named the Vibrator. If you look at his belt, there's a big V on it.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Right. It suggests that the character was once named that, and they realized we can't name it that. We had a listener from Greece write into our show, and in Greece, they redo the comics and put them out later, and the guy who edited the comics there and did the translation was notoriously direct in his translations. So in Greece to this day, the Shocker is known as the Vibrator. That is his name. Yeah.
But you know what, Dan, you're right, because I've never noticed. Yeah, his butt.
Yeah, I
was
never
a V.
noticed that. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big old V. His whole design is a V.
Yeah.
He certainly
Sure
does.
is.
He certainly does continue to bring up his vibrating power every 18 seconds. So that does lend to that.
Yeah,
And
I would love
Go
to
ahead,
know how the word vibrator, how much it had pervaded culture at the time, or if that's a more modern word than these comics. But it seems to me like it's obvious he was once the Vibrator.
That's pretty awesome.
Wow. Now the last panel is the essence of Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in my first comic shop that was later destroyed in a flood, my cousin is a very talented artist. She reproduced this panel on a huge mirror for me with the dialogue.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, it was destroyed in the flood, but because it's Peter just going through all the different ways his life sucks. and it's one panel. It's like the melancholy Spider-Man, you know, kind of sitting up on a chimney or top of a roof or something. And he's just how many times have we seen this, right? Where he's just up there thinking about, God, nothing's going right. And it's all there, one panel.
Yeah.
All I get out of it is some skin knuckles.
Earlier on, by the way, don't bet on it, sweetie.
Oh, yeah. No, his repartee with his villains is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I think we have to turn to one of the more unfortunate villains in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery.
Oh no.
Okay. I have thoughts because so any relation at all to Juggernaut?
There's no relation.
No, not that I know of.
Yes, Stan just tended to recycle surnames sometimes. So that's how we end up with no fewer than 3 Silver Age villains I can think of on the top of my head with the surname Marco.
Bird, let's hear those 3 villains, please.
Juggernaut, Man Mountain Marco, and Sandman, although we would later learn that Marco was just an alias he used.
Fantastic.
Oh my
There's a suggestion at one point that he and Sandman are cousins, but then it was retconned by that name obviously being changed.
Got it.
Dan, do you think Man Mountain Marco's face and hair are reminiscent of John Romita Sr.?
I think that's actually pretty astute.
Okay.
I've never put that together, but yeah, I don't think it's too much of a stretch.
From the 60s, it looks like him.
Yeah, I don't think it's too much of a stretch. I don't know. I hope he dresses like this. I mean, just like the full leather getup. I'm for it.
I'm looking at an old photo of him now, and yeah, you know what? Good point.
Well, Stan was the dean of ESU. Why shouldn't John make himself a magia thug?
Why not?
Sure.
These opening pages, the web closes. And again, it's Buscema, so I love Buscema's work. And God, he draws a gorgeous Gwen Stacy. Holy mackerel. It's Gwendy. Boy, she must have taken a double dose of pretty pills today. God, I miss thought balloons. Man. So this sequence reminds us of the long-standing alliance between Spider-Man and Captain Stacy.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're going to learn in issue 90, Captain Stacy always knew Peter was Spider-Man, and he never revealed it. And they give a lot of hints throughout the title that he knew. And Spider-Man suspected that he knew.
Yeah.
So, but here they have this sort of crime-fighting relationship that they maintain. And then we get to Man Mountain Marco destroying the upholstery.
He really goes for it.
Yeah.
I mean,
he just doesn't break the legs. He rips it in half.
Yeah, that's obviously the way that you show your strength, is to rip a chair apart.
Yeah.
Well, he was trying to find the tablet.
Oh, yeah, sure. This is the issue that had the coloring issues. It wasn't even just with the Robertsons, but it's also with Marco. And I understand that Romita Sr. drew the cover and didn't draw the interiors necessarily, but his hair color is different on the cover than it is in the comic. Clearly, he has what appears to be brown hair on the cover, and then when you get into the issue, Marco's hair is jet black.
I thought it was blue. Like Spider-Man's costume.
Yeah. Okay, fine.
Oh, great.
He's got blue highlights.
No, I'm kidding, because it seems clear to me that Spider-Man was supposed to be black and red.
Yes,
and was changed to blue and red.
Yeah, which is why I enjoyed them doing that in the latest Spider-Man film, sort of harkening back to that a little bit.
Yep,
for sure.
Yep.
Ian, I would just say there that since Romita did the cover, but he didn't do the interiors, then that just got lost in translation most likely.
Yeah.
But another great point you make, I noticed as well, when they get to Robbie and Randy having a chat in his office.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on there.
I don't know what's going on there either. That's a problem.
Yeah. But this is a great scene because it's Robbie standing up to Jonah and basically teaching his son a lesson as he's doing that. And of course, Jameson totally backs down.
It almost looks like they forgot a layer of coloring. You know, they're literally colored as if they're like black and white, and yet J. Jonah isn't.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Anybody else find it, and they kind of rectify this later, that how the hell Man Mountain Mark could even fight Spider-Man at all? Like, he's just an oversized thug. Like, okay, he can tear a armchair in half, but come on.
He's got plot strength.
Oh. And it's hard to hear his voice as anything other than, I got it, boss. I snatched it out of the girl's apartment.
Yep.
Murd,
Yep.
this isn't the introduction of the Magia, is it? No, right?
No. I think whatever the first appearance of Count Lucchino Nefario was.
That's right. Okay.
That's
X-Men
when
or Avengers? One of those titles.
I'm not sure myself, Chris.
Yeah, we could be corrected on the forums for that or Facebook. But if listeners don't know, the Magia is Marvel's version of the Mafia, basically.
Yep.
So that's what it is.
I love the Caesar Cicero character and the Silvermane characters. Their designs just reek of like Godfather nastiness.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
like Mario Puzo just showed up and started writing this.
With notes of Chester Gould's Dick Tracy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Puzo did work in comics briefly.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think he did. Didn't he? I feel like he did.
Let's
double check that.
Let's just say he did.
Even Gordon Willis's lighting style shows up at the bottom of page 17. You can't make out anything.
For those who don't know, Dan is making a joke about the cinematographer of The Godfather. So,
I since we already went to 17, I gotta talk about the mustache.
Oh,
Harry, what did you do?
oh, the Fu Manchu. Oh,
Yeah.
soul
Yes.
stash.
So
Murd, what do you
bad.
think? What do you think about that, Murd?
Far out. Enough said. And the fact that he says he actually went into seclusion for several days just to grow the damn thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted it to make a big reveal.
There's a similar thing that happens in an earlier issue or maybe a later issue where Mary Jane decides to cut her hair.
Oh,
And-
she has like the perm type thing.
Yeah, and it's it's there in an issue and it's gone in the next issue, and it's like, nope, that design did not last. Same with Harry's mustache.
Well, it's back 2 issues, but Scarlet Witch's costume is drawn an entirely different color and entirely different style than it shows
Yeah.
up anywhere
Well,
else.
Her costume, if I remember correctly, and Murd can correct me here, I think they kind of modified it a bit throughout the Silver Age.
Mm-hmm.
Did it have different colors or the Scarlet Witch's costume?
If so, it might not have been deliberate.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's hard for me to say because I'm looking at what it looks like in issue number 71 here because I'm looking at black and white pages. But
Right. Yeah, it's drawn. It's let's put it this way: it's not the color scarlet.
No.
and that's something you would expect from the Scarlet Witch.
Wait, which issue was Harry's Fu Manchu in? I just lost my track here.
74.
Yeah, 74. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
You notice he's also got the generic Asian pendant also around his turtleneck. It's poor Harry. And he actually has the Fu Manchu for a couple issues. I remember him wearing it into the early 80s
Oh, I'm so sorry.
in terms of issue numbers. So
I think it goes to the drug issue, and then you don't see it after that.
no, he doesn't have it in the drug issue. I think he has it. It's before that, Dan. I want to say issue 82.
Yeah, you might be
so,
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that that's important, but it's just those fun little pop culture touches where they're trying to kind of capture the zeitgeist
Yeah.
with Harry's mustache.
Switching over to Silvermane for a minute. So he's old, right? You can tell because he keeps talking about how old he is.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fact
Nothing
that
else
he's
gave
named
it
after
away.
his own white hair. It's,
Yes.
Yeah.
might be called putting a hat on.
Parents knew that I'd be old and gray with white hair.
In fact, it's more silver. My mane is silver. I'm Silvermane.
Yeah. I'm Silvermane. The name gave it away. I knew I was doomed from the start.
We've suddenly turned
Shane,
him
I
into
love where
Woody
you're going
Allen,
with this,
and I'm
buddy.
not sure.
I never want this bit to end.
Jackson the meal.
You remind me of one of the voices in those old Jerky Boys phone prank tapes. God. 74 back to Ramita and Mooney. So Buscema's not in issue 74. Art's, of course, still great. Now we have Kurt Connors, of course.
Yep.
The Lizard.
And the Lizard is used really well in this. Connors is used really well.
Yes,
but
I think so.
I
love it. They show him trying to hold off his transformation.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, that's always my favorite bit about Kurt is can't get angry. Oh no, I see a little nubbin of my other arm coming out. I need to calm down.
Yep.
Calm down.
By the way, I just realized that the big C, his name is Caesar Cicero.
Mm-hmm.
So Stan just dipped just a slight bit into Roman history there and just threw those two names together. I love
A character that's never come back.
No, that's right. Yeah, I don't think he has. Yeah.
You know,
He's in the Lifeline miniseries again.
is he? Oh,
he
yeah,
is.
you're right. He
Okay.
is.
Well done, Murd. Well done.
Mm.
Yeah, and good call on his name too, Chris. It's the Emperor and the Orator. You know, the lawyer who would be king. It's suits his character perfectly.
Fantastic. I like how we get a good shot of the spider signal, which we don't often see.
Yeah.
No, I thought that was cool.
Yeah. 'Cause we always forget it's on his belt.
I almost on a regular basis forget it's on his belt because I, for some reason, just never focus on the fact that he has a tiny emblem of himself on his belt.
Only when that thing's on.
Good point, actually. You're right. because
Otherwise, it disappears.
yeah. Does he keep it in his pocket and just take it out on special occasions?
And I almost hear from it going on and going off. I can almost hear. It's a noise that I associate with the Super Friends cartoon when something changes or light changes.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like giving you the impression of on and off. That's what I can hear when I see that.
But I'm glad you mentioned the Super Friends, Shane, because when I'm not hearing Stan's voice in those yellow boxes, I'm hearing...
You hear Ted Knight?
Yes. Sometime later in another part of the city...
back at the Hall of Justice.
Aquaman!
Oh, Aquaman. Superman.
Now, I'm at the page now where we see Harry in his getup. Notice how Gwen suddenly is completely empathetic
Yeah.
and understanding of Peter's plight.
Yeah. Gwen. This is one of my notes here. Gwen. As much as we congratulate Stan on his characterization and his building of the supporting cast, which he deserves, he was never quite as kind to his female characters. I mean, Gwen in this story, just as an example, is all over the map emotionally.
Yep. Yeah.
All kinds of highs and lows, but that's sadly typical of Stan's way of writing Silver Age superhero love interests. They tended to be fickle creatures, emotionally hot and cold and mercurial, and they tended to react to the main character's actions in whatever way generates the most friction, angst, melodrama, whatever word you want to use. One minute she's punching somebody for daring to impute cowardice to Peter. The very next issue she's, for no particular reason, seeing what that guy was talking about in Peter. He shows up and he's a little mopey and drowsy and not acting courageous, and she runs away from him. And now we swing back around to what you were just describing in this issue, Chris. Yeah. I mean, you have to assume that what was going on campus lately, the whole demonstration, activism happenings might have it might have had her stressed and brought out the worst in her. But yeah, she's just kind of swinging back and forth like crazy in this story, and I wish it were less typical of Stan's writing of female characters, but it's sadly not.
Yeah.
The kindest thing ever done to Gwen was that she died, because she's remembered more fondly in her death than she ever was as a interesting character in the pages of this book. And then that allows for us to get things like Spider-Gwen, where she can truly be revitalized as a hero in a way, and people forget what Gwen was written like for the issues that she appeared in, and more as this legacy of the one girl that loved Spider-Man and yada yada yada.
And the least kind thing that they did to Gwen was done by J. Michael Straczynski many years later.
Oh, I was waiting for someone to bring that up.
Yeah.
I don't blame him for that.
Really?
That reeks of editorial influence.
Point.
I think he said as much.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me.
I think when the Spider-Man Blue miniseries, which what do you think of that miniseries, Dan?
I love it. We actually did a really interesting episode where we brought our wives on to review the book.
Oh, wow.
And they famously didn't like it.
Really?
Because of how it treats its female characters as like, I mean, it gives them some life, but they're mostly thought of in like kind of nostalgic sex object ways. Like the final image of Gwen is her in like lingerie, like revealing herself to Peter. And like that's the final memory we kind of get of her. And our wives really took it to pieces, but I love it. And
well, the reason why I mentioned I agree with you is that that miniseries is such a love letter to this period, and there was might have been Spider-Man Annual in 1996 where they did a retro story. I can't remember the exact issue number. It was an annual. And they went back to this period. It was like in between a story with Craven and Gwen and Norman Osborn. Again, they capture the feel of these stories. But the new Gwen Stacy miniseries, which is now on hiatus because of what's happening in the world, if you want to see a more fleshed out, more realized, interesting Gwen, and she's in high school in these stories, definitely read that miniseries. It's Todd Nauck is the artist. Oh, who the hell is the writer?
Christos N. Gage, perhaps?
Yes. Yeah, it's really well done.
I have bought the first 2 issues.
Yeah, you had me at knock, my friend. So that's
it's Gwen is the type of character where I agree where in many ways she's kind of one-dimensional, and she's often overshadowed by Mary Jane. Well, the Mary Jane actually doesn't even appear in these stories now that I think about it.
No.
Yeah, she doesn't appear at all.
She's
mentioned once or twice, but she's not actually on panel.
Yep.
She's mentioned as Harry's date, for example. But
and also as the Guess Who reveal when Gwen puts her hands around Peter's eyes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Spider says, "Where were you when I needed you?" So, what do we think of what happens to Silvermane?
It's terrifying.
Okay. Now, of course, yet again, the big reveal of I gambled everything on being right about this tablet's secret, the only secret that could save me, the secret of the Fountain of Youth. And his hair is not silver at the end of the issue.
Right.
And he's wearing flood pants now too.
Yeah.
Well, that's because he went from a shrinking old man to a young, robust man.
Exactly.
Yeah. I also appreciate a little bit earlier on, by the way, the conversation between Billy and Mrs. Connors. The fact that Billy knows. That was the smartest thing that happened in this issue was having him not be a dumb kid. Because kids are not oblivious. They know when things are happening with their parents, and when their parent is a giant green lizard, it's kind of easy to tell.
That's good point, Ian. Very good point.
Yeah.
Only for him to later be eaten by his father.
Yeah.
Oy.
I'd forgotten about that.
Wait, the lizard ate his son?
That.
Lizard ate his son?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Boy.
When did that happen?
Back in the Brand New Day era in a book called Shed.
Yep.
I actually, my picture appears in that comic, of all things. But during Shed, of course. Now Billy's back. He was cloned using lizard DNA, so now he's part lizard.
Oh God!
And then he and his father got into a fight with Craven, and now it's a whole thing. But yes.
It's like how Black Widow died, but there's a clone running around as her, so everything's fine. There's still a Black Widow, eh?
Yeah, and like Tony Stark died, but then it was like a virtual copy of him that's having existential thoughts about whether he's actually a human being or just machine. Himself finally becoming the Iron Man for real. It's a whole thing.
Wow.
What were you going to say, Murd?
I was just going to ask Dan what Martha Connor's the status quo was. Is she?
She also is a lizard.
Oh, okay.
She is also part lizard now. They live in the sewers with their father and have a apartment-ish in the sewers where she's serving dinner. And the status quo is that Billy Connors kind of wants to run away and be a part of the surface world again, but he can't because his father has trapped him as a lizard. So it's kind of the same status quo, just displaced to the sewers. And the interesting thing is only Kurt can transform between human and lizard. So when he lectures at ESU, he's a human, despite everybody knowing that he killed his own son. And when he's in the sewer, he puts on the appearance of a lizard so that his family doesn't get upset when they see him as a human being. It's a whole thing.
Sounds like Marvel's version of the Man-Bat family.
Yes, yes. It's very similar, yeah. There is no status quo more shaky than the lizard's status quo. I mean, even within Dan Slott's run, there's issues where the lizard reforms his body out of brain material so that when he gets punched, he's soft like a brain and it damages his great intellect. And then 10 issues later, people had forgotten that even happened. I mean, the lizard is just he's stuck in the status quo that he was introduced in and was popularized by the 90s cartoon. And I feel like no creator feels like they can move out of that familiar territory.
So in conclusion, comics.
Yes, exactly. Yes. He's just famous enough that you can't do anything with him, but not famous enough that you need to adhere to continuity.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was almost overwhelming. Wow, thank you. God, it's kind of a reminder of why I don't read a lot of current superhero comics as much because of stuff just like that.
Just be glad you're not my wife, I think is really what I'm trying to say.
We're on the last issue, so I will start off by pointing out just how stupid Man Mountain Marco is.
How stupid is he?
He is so stupid that someone could be standing right in front of him, and he was there the entire time, and yet all of a sudden, yeah, it was a trick. I'm going to attack the guy. It's like you didn't leave the room, dude.
Yeah. Where did he come from?
It's the only way his mind can make sense of what it has just witnessed, by trying to punch it.
Apparently.
In a way, I'm kind of glad that he's around, though. I mean, he's given us what we'll call it a common man's perspective on the fantastic events of this story. He's kind of like a Shakespearean Rude Mechanical in this Stan Levian Shakespearean drama that's unfolding in this issue.
Oh, and
Not to mention Silverman looks like Reed Richards.
yes.
He does, kind of.
What's always been curious to me is that when he gets even younger than his Reed Richards phase, he kind of looks like an angry Peter Parker.
He does.
And if you watch the 90s cartoon, when he gets to that phase, Christopher Daniel Barnes does the voice for him. So it sounds like Peter is confronting Peter. It's a really weird moment, but he's only there for 5 seconds. So they're I guess we'll swap in Christopher Daniel Barnes for a minute and people won't think about it much.
Also, Chris, because you brought up the 60s cartoon earlier, there is a lot of swinging from buildings or locations that he couldn't possibly be swinging from in this issue. Just swinging in the middle of the air. You don't have to worry about it. There's a web. It's fine.
Of course.
Don't ask questions.
It's like you said before, comics.
Exactly.
What do we think of? Because this is a very action-heavy issue.
Yeah.
What do we think of basically Silvermane's transformation and how it's portrayed, and his ultimate? Well, it's not his ultimate fate, but his fate, at least in this story arc.
Yep. In theme and in pacing, it's very much like a classic episode of one of those sci-fi anthologies of the 60s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits. It's a very good example of the kind of trope that it is.
Yeah. That was absolutely what I thought as well, Murd. Spot on.
You even get that Spider-Man meme that originates here of him putting his face into his palm that you see on the internet. I don't know how familiar you guys are with that.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
It's like Spider Tebowing.
By the way, there's a nice touch, and we were joking this before, but a few pages back where Spidey says to Marco, I went easy on you last time, Marco, because I had other things on my mind, and there was a lady present. Then he disposes of them in one panel.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
which makes more sense.
Makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
The transformation itself, I've always found like really just terrifying.
It's creepy.
There's
great
the
art.
image
Yeah.
of his face screaming, "Not this!"
Yeah.
And it's almost like a manga drawing.
Yeah.
It's so expressive, but
Yeah,
like
that's a good point.
it stands out here because you don't get that level of like raw expression in these comics. Especially from Romita, whose characters tend to look very similar. Like an image that stands out is really shocking.
Yeah.
Especially because he's a little boy at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it
And I
And
I like page 10 where Dr. Connors is saying, "Hey, I've got to get out of here. If they realize what's really going to happen, I'm dead," kind of thing. And he knows what's going to happen and just did it because he's trying to save his family.
Yep. No, the way they show this transformation is always great. The scales in the back of his neck and
Yeah. Props to the letterer on this issue too, especially with the "not this," because
Right.
yeah, that completely pops. Like it's different than every other piece of lettering in the issue, and yet it stands out. And even the coloring is just alarming in some ways.
well, the letter is one of the great Marvel letter stalwarts of the '60s, which is Artie Simic.
I love page 13's sprinkling, or
Yes.
I'm probably adding a letter in there, but it is a standout.
Sprinkling. Yes.
You know, that common sound we all hear.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Or fating.
And I always found really effectively creepy on the page where Silvermane, quote, dies, and you see on the top panel, you can tell there's basically like a baby
Yeah.
or like a very small child, like in the last sort of rippling folds of the shirt. The pants, he's not big enough to be in the pants anymore, and you kind of see the shadow of the head, and then it's just gone. It's really effective art and creepy. Like it's really well done.
Yes, it's just effectively constructed suspense. It shows you
Yeah.
just enough, but no more, and let your mind fill in the horrific gaps.
Yeah.
Yep.
I fill in the gaps like he's becoming some kind of like primordial ooze. I mean, like what happens there? Where does baby go? Does the mother randomly appear and he crawls back into the womb? Like what is the process like there?
Well, they cleaned it up a bit. They, instead of the primordial ooze, they give us like a primordial strobe light.
The Dazzler shows up for a half page.
Where does the baby go? Into the Twilight Zone.
There you go.
And that last page, I thought the way they rendered the lizard there is tremendous.
Yeah.
Only the beast remains. Look at those eyes. Great art.
Yeah, it was really, really good, and I probably will read some more issues in sequence here just to see what happens.
Oh,
with the
Ian,
lizard.
wait a minute. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let me emphasize, and I'm
Yeah.
sure Dan will concur. Don't stop here, because the next 76 through the drug issues at least are all classic Silver Age Spider-Man. I mean, you've got stuff where Spidey goes on a version of the Tonight Show. He's got to go to a laundromat with a paper bag mask on his head to clean his costume before the TV appearance.
Bagman.
Yep, you got great stuff with the Chameleon, Electro. And then the Green Goblin drug issues are tremendous.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got like stuff like the Schemer, which is like a forgotten villain, but it's a great
Kingpin's son.
storyline.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's a great storyline too. Yep.
There's so much good stuff in those issues. I mean, I would dare say like go back and start with one. Like the Stan Lee, and all of his collaborators run. I just, it's my favorite thing in comics, and I think there's like very few misses in the whole thing.
Well,
I agree.
I unsurprisingly have a lot of time on my hands right now, so it may be a good time for me to do so.
Now, Murd, I'm sure you have notes that we haven't heard yet.
Not many, actually. And I imagine that the bulk of the discussion would come from you two gentlemen who are more familiar with the character in the period. Let's see. The only one or two things I guess I could mention. Well, just the fact that we meet as Dan mentioned in passing a while ago, we meet Kingpin's wife Vanessa for the first time, albeit only as like an indistinct image through a car window. But just the fact that the Kingpin has a wife at all, as indeed so few gangster characters in comics had till this point. And for that matter, gangsters were kind of like the ultimate disposable antagonist in superhero comics for the first couple of decades of the genre's existence. And it's only like really in the Marvel era that Stan started reusing underworld figures like this, like non-costumed gangsters. Usually didn't get that kind of development. But the fact that the Kingpin is assigned a wife whom he loves enough to nearly kill one of his underlings for so much as mentioning her name, I mean, that goes a long way to giving some unprecedented humanization to this character that's being built here, this Kingpin of crime.
Well put, my friend.
Yep.
Well, Murr, did we convince you at all of the classicness of this story?
I think I can see it a little more clearly than I could when this episode began.
Good to know. I do have a little bit, as we tend to do with any sort of spotlight, a quote unquote in other media to discuss quickly, gentlemen. So
Please.
I'll go ahead and do so. The only instance that I know of this storyline being translated into animated form occurred in the 90s during the Spider-Man the Animated Series, the amazing. Well, it wasn't called The Amazing Spider-Man, but The Amazing Series that it was. It was Season 2, Episode 11, and Season 2, Episode 12, titled Tablet in Time, and then Ravages of Time. And it's a surprisingly faithful transition. Shockingly, Man Mountain Marco is not part of it, and which I am A-okay with. Instead, they use Hammerhead.
Okay.
They also give Silvermane a daughter, which is a potential love interest for Peter Parker. Throughout it, but she, turned when he finds out that she is actually, a daughter involved with the Magia, that sort of disappears pretty quickly. So that doesn't wind up happening anywhere as much. Also, Alistair Smythe, because he was a part of literally everything in the first couple seasons of the animated series, and Tombstone played heavily in there. But they did use Kirk Connors and obviously Silvermane. And by the time the story concludes, it's pretty similar to the way it concludes in the comics. You watch him, waste away. You don't watch him waste away into nothing because it's a animated series from 1995. But you do see him as a baby, and that from there, Alyssa Silvermane has to look after her own father for a while. So that's its own thing. And by the time this two-parter is over, Vanessa Fisk has already been introduced in the animated series. This is when Vanessa initially leaves Kingpin. So she basically, separates from the Kingpin at the end of this two-parter. So that's, in the continuity of the show and what have you. But overall, for what they did, it's pretty darn close to what we get. The only thing we don't get are Kirk Connors' family. But that's, other than that, pretty damn close.
Interesting.
And
I'm going to watch that.
These are on Disney Plus, right?
Yes,
Ian?
yes,
they are.
Yeah, they're onlisted as one very, very long season, as opposed to individual seasons. So you'll just have to keep scrolling through until you find these two parts. But it's very easy to find on Disney Plus as long as you search for Spider-Man.
Yep.
I'll also
Now-
point out that there's
ahead,
the Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions video game from a few years back, probably like more than a few years now, like 10 years ago. That was the inspiration for the Spider-Verse comic series that Dan Slott wrote, which obviously would then spawn this whole other thing. But in that story, the MacGuffin is a tablet that is apparently the sister tablet to the Lifeline tablet. And that becomes the whole quest of the game is Mysterio's quest to get that version of the tablet and take over all the dimensions of the Spider-Verse. The tablet, the Lifeline tablet, has kind of gone on to be a like dimension hopping artifact. We're like I said earlier, in the middle of an arc with Nick Spencer, where the Lifeline tablet is wreaking havoc across all these various dimensions.
Very cool.
Now, the Lifeline story that Murd mentioned, which I've read, but it's been a long time, the Necezia Rude story. Did anybody have, like Dan or Murd, do you have any comments on that in terms of how good it is? It's been a long time for me.
Oh, well, I think it's excellent, actually.
Okay.
I mean, it's Necezia, so he's got a pretty strong working knowledge of Marvel continuity.
Yes.
He's got a knack for characterization and dialogue, although I'm not 100% a fan of his take on Boomerang, and I think there was one other character that I thought felt a little off. But and it's Steve Rude's artwork, which is, of course, just gorgeous, very, very Silver Age flavored. And there's no better word for it than ginchy, I think. Unless it were snappy, of course, which is favorite of Steve Rude's. So yeah, it's very much a sequel to the story that we've just been talking about. It's 3 issues of the reemergence of the Lifeline tablet. It's another MacGuffin hunt. It's another case of hot potato with this magic tablet and various underworld figures who want it for their own purposes. And we learned that there were other fragments of the tablet that changed the chemical formula inscribed thereupon and caused it to have very different effects. Necezia works in guest appearances by Doctor Strange and Namor, who help to decipher the tablet's ultimate meaning. There's a bunch of classic Marvel villains in there. The aforementioned Boomerang, the Eel is in there, and Hammerhead is. It's kind of a duel between Hammerhead and the Big C, Caesar Cicero, as to who is going to get the tablet and make use of it. And yes, Man Mountain Marco also shows up again in that story.
I recently purchased these for the first time, and they feel like 3 issues of a creative team for Amazing Spider-Man that never happened. Like it is, one of the. I think. Well, he said it. That Steve Rude's art is incredible, and I think a perfect fit for the character. There are some weird characterizations, but it feels right at home, and I'm surprised it's not talked of more favorably, and I suspect that's because it's kind of a small mini-series. There's some really great moments.
Only 3 issues, correct?
Yeah. There's some great moments. There's a very strange moment where, the Lifeline tablet is no longer just a fountain of youth, as he alluded to. It it transforms you into a god, and for a moment, Hammerhead drinks it and becomes godlike. He even learns, Peter's secret identity, and he becomes this glowing yellow divine creature before everything ultimately collapses in on him for reasons that aren't very well elucidated. But it is fun nevertheless.
Yeah. Peter's reaction to the Hammerhead's metamorphosis is, "I liked you better when you talked like Marlon Brando."
These issues are not on Marvel Unlimited as of yet, by the way, because I literally just did a search for it and they're not there. However, all 3 issues,
Comixology, I believe.
They are on Comixology for $2
yeah.
a pop. So I think I'm going to go ahead and make that buy.
You won't be
do
sorry.
that too. Yeah, because I haven't read that since it came out, so I don't remember it very, very well. So wonderful.
Yep.
There's actually a really strange recap of it in the latest issue of Amazing Spider-Man before everything was shut down, where they feature Hammerhead's transformation and all of this stuff. And I was really pleased to see, Nick Spencer is a bit of a nut for Marvel continuity, so he tries to weave that stuff in as much as possible. And that was fun, because I think a lot of people probably read that and were like, I have no idea what this is from.
Oh, I have to hunt that down, because I love when they really try to mine the continuity like that.
I mean, it brings back the Lifeline tablet, and it also brings back Gog, and gives Gog a complicated backstory. If you know Amazing Spider-Man 102, where Spider-Man kills an alien from another planet.
Yep.
It's his first confirmed on-panel murder.
Wow.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Gentlemen, any closing thoughts?
Well, we do you have this thing called Freckin' Swears that we may as well go ahead and give it? So for the uninitiated, Dan, that's our out of 5 rating. It's a long story and a long tradition of mispronouncing a phrase that has become our catchphrase in some ways over the years.
Perfect.
All right. So how many Freckin' Swears do we give it, Chris?
Oh, 5.
Murd?
3 3/4.
Nice. Shane?
I'm going to go with 4. I enjoyed it a lot.
All right. I'm gonna give it a 4 myself. Actually, I think it's pretty high up there. And Dan?
I'm going to say 5 because I'm the Spider-Man guy.
Wouldn't have it any other way.
No, it's thrilling because the fact that Shamer and Ian had never read this before, so I envy that journey, and I'm glad we kind of did our duty here because you all gave it pretty favorable ratings. So
Yeah, it
I'm
was
glad
fun.
you enjoyed it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was in the right mood for something campy too. So this was definitely filled that niche, and also wasn't nearly as campy as I was expecting, which pleasantly surprised me.
And I like that I got a little bit of Kingpin, a little bit of Shocker, a little bit of Lizard, a little bit of this, a little bit of Gwen Stacy, saw Harry, a little bit of Daily Bugle. It was a little bit of everything that I expect out of Spider-Man, all in 8 issues.
Yeah, it was a little bit of the sci-fi fantasy stan, and a little bit of social relevance stan, and a little bit of comedy stan, and a little bit of slugfest stan.
Yep.
So, yeah, it is a pretty good cross-section of his different interests at this precise time in his career as Spider Scribe.
And I think that's why I love this era so much, because it captures all those elements, as you just noted, Murd.
Yeah. There's only one thing it could have used. Rhino?
Rhino doesn't appear again for quite a while, now that I think about it. Right?
Yeah, no, that's accurate.
Yeah.
It's the same is true with Electro. He went away for 100 issues.
He comes back in issue 82.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's the paper bag mask issue.
Nice.
A lot of these characters, Chameleon, didn't come back for I think over 100 issues.
Issue 80 he appeared. Issue 80, yep.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
another great
great.
issue.
Yeah, it is.
Ian, keep reading. The stories after the ones you read are also really entertaining.
I'm planning on it, and I may also take Dan's suggestion at some point and just start at 1 and work my way up. But I'm definitely going from where I am and moving forward. Yep.
Terrific.
Yep. And
well, Dan, it was a real treat to have you on this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was a lot of fun, guys. I love revisiting these stories when I have the chance, and especially in this much detail.
Oh, absolutely, man. And go ahead and tell everybody out there in internet land where they can find your works.
Sure. I'm the co-host of the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. We've been going for about 8 years, and we have seasonal content where we choose each season. We cover a part of Spider-Man's history. So we're in the middle of talking about the Marv Wolfman and Denny O'Neil run, but you can just go back to season 1. If you, like the guys here, want to maybe dive into some Silver Age Spidey, you can start off with our coverage of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and we bring on guests from all over the Spider-Man creator verse, if you will. We've had Jerry Conway on 7 times, and
wow.
We get everybody but Steve and Stan, which is now impossible, but we'll still try to do it. I will find a way. If you want to kind of journey through Spider-Man, you can we'll guide you through it all and tell you what's kind of special and going on. And then we also have a series called the Essential Series, where we chose 30 books that we think all new Spider-Man readers should check out to get a sampling of all the different eras of Spider-Man. So we're kind of trying to fit everybody's needs. And then we review every new issue as well. Our goal is to cover every single Spider-Man thing ever by the end of the show, and I think we're well on our way to doing it. So if you want to know anything about Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider Talk is the place to go.
Fantastic.
Indeed.
Cool. Yep. And you're on Twitter as well, right?
Oh, yes, I am. My Twitter handle is @SupSpiderTalk. It used to be because we were called Superior Spider Talk before we changed our name, because we thought we were just going to do a flash-in-the-pan review show of Superior Spider-Man, but I like it now because it's like saying, what's up? So sup Spider Talk.
Dan, did you interview John Romita Sr.?
I have not. I mean, I've talked to him in person myself, but he does not do interviews anymore, and so that's going to be very difficult. We do have an interview with his son, so if you want to check that out, you can do that too.
Yeah, I got to see him speak at a Baltimore Comic-Con where they initiated Junior into the Hall of Fame, and Stan was sitting directly in front of me, and that is the one time as close to Stan Lee as I ever got, and he had a lady on each arm, as was his wont.
Can you indulge me for a great story about that event that I was also at?
Yeah, sure.
So I don't know if you went. They did a conference with Stan at the convention before the award ceremony. Were you at that as well?
No, I wasn't actually.
So Romita Sr. was not advertised as being a part of it, and I was like, I bet he's going to come. So I brought my Stan Lee signed issue of Amazing Spider-Man number 50, which is my favorite issue of Amazing Spider-Man. If you ask me on any given day, it'll change. But I brought that one with me because I thought, that's the best one to have Stan and John Romita sign. And I went to this conference where Stan was answering questions, and all of a sudden they brought John Romita Sr. on stage unannounced. And I was like, this is so great. And they did questions, but then they did a trivia bit. And they said, does anybody in the crowd feel like they know their Spider-Man trivia? And I raised my hand, and they just so happened to call on me amongst like dozens of hands. And they said, if you answer these 3 questions, we'll give you a signed poster from Stan Lee and John Romita Sr. And I was like, all right, here we go. So, and also here, I'm going to ask you guys the questions and see if you know them.
Yeah, sure.
So the first question was, what is the first villain that Stan Lee and John Romita Sr. created together?
Ooh.
Hold on. Oh man. Is it John Jameson in the astronaut suit or the Rhino?
It is the Rhino.
Okay.
Okay.
But everybody in the crowd was shouting Green Goblin because obviously they worked on that issue together, but not, obviously they didn't create that character.
Right.
So the next question, so I got that right. The next question was, what is the first issue of any Marvel comic where John Romita Sr. drew Spider-Man?
Ooh.
That would be the Spectacular Spider-Man magazine?
It's not. It's not an issue of Spider-Man, I'll tell you that.
Wait, you mean in Daredevil?
It is. Daredevil, do you know the number?
12 or 13?
You're close. It's 16.
Okay. All right.
The only reason I knew that at the time was because just the week prior, I had gone to my local comic book store, and it was on the wall, and I bought it. And so it was fresh in my mind. And I was like, yes. Okay, so then the final question was, in the John Romita Sr. Stan Lee Spider-Man comic strip from the newspapers, I mean, what was the first villain that Spider-Man fought?
Oh, I don't know that one.
Ooh, yeah.
That's obscure. It's Dr. Doom. And the only reason I knew that, even though I read that newspaper strip, was because I bought this book, Spider-Man the Icon, and it reprinted the first strip from that.
Oh, that's a great book. I have that book too.
It's great. And by Steve Saffel, and so I remembered that. So it was like a Slumdog Millionaire moment where all these little pieces started coming together.
Wow.
So I won, and they're like, okay, we'll come up and get your poster. So I reached in my backpack and pulled out my Amazing Spider-Man number 50. And I went up there and I said, instead of the poster, can I get you guys to sign this? And so that's how I have my issue 50 signed by both of them.
That's awesome.
It's like my big moment.
Oh,
so,
my God.
It's a really prized possession. And I mean, the comic is a bit beat up, but it's was loved by me for a very long time. And, when I got Stan to sign it, he was like, oh, this is one of my favorite ones. Whether that was true or not, and he's like, I'm so glad you brought this to me. Not many people bring me this one. And I was like, all right, I love you, Stan.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a great Baltimore Comic-Con.
I'm glad we both have Stan experiences from that. Yours a lot more awesome than mine, but at the same time, oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's
Sorry for hijacking it there for a second.
No, that's
please.
awesome. That's a great story.
yeah.
Love hearing that.
And in some ways, we got to muddle this episode.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Yeah.
Good reference to Slumdog Millionaire. As unfortunately, the day we record this,
the actor died.
Yeah, if
Yes,
Khan
yes.
from it passed away. Yeah. Yep. Alrighty. I think that's just about everything, gents. Right?
We've shot our bolt, and gentlemen, this was a real delight. Thank you for this topic.
Absolutely. All right, Shane, you ready?
Yep.
All right, let's roll.
Visit us at comicgeekspeak.com to send us an email. The address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. To leave a voicemail, the number is 267-702-6642. Stop by thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com. Let us know what you think of this second mini spotlight episode we've done. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Thank you to everyone who contributes to the show and donates to the show. We sincerely do appreciate it. Thank you, Dan, for coming on. It was a lot of fun, very informative. I liked being able to sit back and just listen to the knowledge that you and Chris had about this time period. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was psyched about it going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything the geeks love. From cakes to laser beams, opinions like the seasons, and everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is Comic Geek Speak.
Excelsior!